They didn't even look me in the eye when they did it. That was the part that burned worse than the ropes. 3 warriors, men I had fed and cleaned for, hauled me to the eastern border. To the dead tree. "The Spartans will be here by midday," the tall one muttered, refusing to meet my gaze. "If they take you, they might spare the rest of us. You were dead weight anyway." I wanted to scream that I had survived Alpha Carl's whip. I had survived 5 years of moonbound injections that caged my wolf, Joy, until she was a ghost. But Omegas don't have voices. They only have duties. And today, my duty was to die so they could live. I was alone for hours. My arms went numb. My wrists bled. Then, he appeared. He was the ugliest dog I'd ever seen. Scarred, matted, with one milky blue eye. I'd fed him scraps when the others threw rocks at him. I called him Bones. He didn't run when the ground began to shake. He didn't run when the Spartan war drums reached a deafening roar. Instead, he began to gnaw. He bit the coarse rope until his gums bled, his tiny body shaking with a fury that no 30-pound animal should possess. The rope snapped. I collapsed, but I wasn't fast enough. The vanguard swept through the clearing like a tidal wave of iron and fur. A warhorse, the size of a mountain, clipped my side. Crack. The sound of my ribs shattering was louder than the drums. I hit the dirt, lungs filling with fluid, sliding into the center of the Spartan staging ground. 10-foot-tall lichens formed a circle around me. They looked at me like a piece of trash washed up on a beach. "Shall I kill the mongrel?" one warrior asked, reaching for his blade as Bones stood over my broken chest, snarling at the giants. "No." The circle parted. Alpha Hector stepped forward. He was a god of war carved from obsidian. His scent, iron, earth, and raw power hit me, and deep inside, my caged wolf, Joy, let out a piercing howl. "Mate." Hector didn't kneel, but he crouched, his green eyes locking onto the dog's mismatched ones. He ignored the warriors. He ignored the carnage. He looked at the dog, then at my dying eyes. "She fed him," Hector stated. It wasn't a guess. He could smell the history of my kindness on the dog's fur. He stood, his presence swallowing the light. "I will let you live," he announced to the silent army. "But you will belong to the beast that saved you, and the master who owns him." I closed my eyes as the darkness took me, feeling the warm, blood-matted fur of the dog press against my side. I was a slave again, but as I faded out, I realized something. The Alpha didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition. If this story caught your attention, thank you for staying with me. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and comment where you are watching from. I woke to pain and the smell of herbs. My ribs were wrapped in linen soaked with something that burned and soothed at the same time. I was lying on rough wool, not a fur, not a bed, but a blanket thrown over packed earth. A tent roof stretched above me, low and plain, without the decorative touches I had seen in the Alpha's quarters. This was a supply tent or a storage room, somewhere out of the way, where things that had no place were kept. The mutt lay beside me. His head rested on my hip, and his eyes were open, watching the tent flap. When I stirred, his tail thumped once against the ground, and he licked my hand. "You stupid dog," I whispered. My voice was ruined, dry and cracked. "You should have run." He thumped his tail again. He did not look stupid. He looked like the only creature in the world who had made a decision and intended to stand by it. I tried to sit up, and the pain in my ribs detonated. I gasped, and the gasp made it worse, and for a terrible moment, I could not breathe at all, just lay there with my mouth open and my chest locked and the tent spinning around me. The mutt whined and pressed closer. When the spasm passed, I lay still and stared at the tent roof and thought about what the Alpha had said. "You will belong to the beast that saved you, and the master who owns him." The beast was a stray. The stray had no master, which meant either the Alpha's words were a riddle I was too broken to solve, or he had claimed the dog, and me with it. The tent flap opened, and a woman ducked inside. She was tall and lean with sharp cheekbones and hair cropped close to her skull. She carried a clay bowl that steamed and smelled like bone broth. Her eyes swept over me with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen worse. "You're awake," she said. "Ribs are shattered in 4 places. I set them, but if you move wrong, one will puncture your lung and you will drown in your own blood. So do not move wrong." She set the broth beside me and crouched. "Drink that. All of it. The Alpha wants you alive, and I do not have time to explain to him why you died on my watch." "Why does he want me alive?" I asked. She looked at me as if I had asked why the sky was blue. "That is not my concern, and it should not be yours. Your concern is drinking that broth, not puncturing your lung, and keeping that mongrel from biting anyone else." She nodded at the mutt. "He took a chunk out of Warrior Rona's hand when they tried to move you in here. Rona wants to skin him." I looked at the mutt. He looked back at me with his one good eye and thumped his tail. "Drink," the woman repeated, and left. I drank. It was the best thing I had tasted in 5 years. 3 days passed. I learned several things. The woman's name was Healer Zara, and she was the closest thing to kindness in the Spartan camp, which meant she was efficient and did not hit me. The Spartan army had set up a forward base on the Titan Pack's eastern border, and the Pack's leadership, including Madame Teresa, had surrendered without a fight. The warriors who had tied me to the tree were among those now scrubbing the Spartans' cookware. I took no joy in this. I was too tired for satisfaction. The mutt did not leave my side. He ate when I ate, slept when I slept, and growled at anyone who came too close. Healer Zara was the only person he tolerated, and even she received a suspicious look each time she changed my bandages. I named him Bones, because I could count every one of his, and because bones were what started this whole impossible thing between us. On the 3rd day, the tent flap opened and the air changed. I knew it was Hector before I saw him. The scent hit me first. Earth, iron, something deep and primal that made joy stir in the cage of my chest for the first time in days. Then the tent flap parted, and he filled the doorway, and the small space shrank around him. Bones stood. His hackles went up, and a growl started low in his throat. But he did not snarl this time. He watched the Alpha with his head lowered, trembling, caught between the urge to protect me and something else, something instinctive that recognized a predator too large to challenge. Hector looked at the dog, then at me. "You are healing," he said, not a question. "Yes, Alpha Hector." My voice was small. I hated how small it was. He stepped inside. Bones pressed against my leg but held his ground. Hector crouched at the foot of my blanket, the same partial crouch from the clearing, controlled and deliberate, and studied me with those green eyes that gave nothing away. "Your pack left you to die," he said. I did not know what to say to that. It was true. Denying it would be stupid, and agreeing felt like admitting something I was not ready to name. "Yes," I said. "And this animal," he nodded at Bones, "chose you over his own safety." I looked at Bones. He was watching Hector with his mismatched eyes, still trembling, still refusing to run. "He's just a dog," I said. "He doesn't know any better." Something shifted in Hector's expression. It was subtle, a tightening at the corner of his jaw, a flicker behind his eyes. "Loyalty like that is not ignorance," he said quietly. "It is the rarest thing in this world, and it does not come from nowhere." He stood. "You will remain in my camp. You will not be assigned to anyone. When you can walk, you will be given work, and the dog stays with you. If anyone touches either of you," his eyes hardened, "they answer to me." He turned to leave. "Alpha Hector." He stopped, did not turn. "Why?" I asked. It was the only word I had. He was quiet for a long time. The tent flap moved in the wind. "Because I have seen 10,000 warriors kneel to save their own necks," he said, "and I have never seen a stray dog stand over a dying girl and dare an army to come closer. You must be worth something." He left. Bones relaxed against my side and pressed his nose into my palm. I lay there in the dim light with my shattered ribs and my ugly dress, and the scent of the Alpha still hanging in the air, and for the first time in 5 years, maybe the first time in my entire cursed, broken, impossible life, I felt something stir in my chest that was not pain. It was not hope. I was not foolish enough for hope, but it was something close, something with teeth. A week after the Spartans took the Titan Pack, I took my first steps outside the supply tent. It was not graceful. Healer Zara had bound my ribs so tightly that I moved like an old woman, hunched and slow, each breath a careful negotiation between my lungs and the broken bones caging them. Bones walked beside me with his body pressed against my leg, steadying me the way a crutch would, except crutches did not growl at anyone who came within 5 feet. The camp was enormous. What had been the Titan Pack's eastern border was now a sprawling military encampment, rows of tents in rigid formation, training grounds churned to mud by hundreds of boots, weapon racks glinting in the morning sun. Warriors moved with purpose everywhere I looked, massive lichen bodies that made even the largest Titan wolves look like pups. They did not look at me. I was beneath their notice, a limping Omega with a stray dog, as invisible as I had always been. Good. Invisible was safe. I had been given a task by healer Zara: collect firewood from the pile at the camp's western edge and bring it to the medical tent. Simple work. Slave work. The kind of work I had done my entire life. My ribs screamed with every piece of wood I lifted, but I did not complain. Complaining was another luxury Omegas could not afford, and I was grateful to have purpose. Purpose meant I was useful, and useful things were not discarded. I was on my 3rd trip to the woodpile when I saw Marietta. She was standing near the central cooking fire with 2 other she-wolves from the Titan Pack, and her eyes found me the way a hawk finds a mouse in an open field, instantly, unerringly, with the kind of focus that precedes violence. She looked different. Her hair was unwashed, her dress stained, and the haughty tilt of her chin had been replaced by something harder and more desperate. The Spartan takeover had stripped her of her status. She was no longer the former Beta's daughter. She was just another she-wolf in a conquered pack, and the fall had made her dangerous. Lyla. She said my name the way her mother did, like it tasted rotten. She stepped away from the other girls and walked toward me. Bones's hackles rose immediately. I kept my eyes on the ground. Old habits. Marietta, I heard the Alpha pulled you from the border. Her voice was light, conversational, the kind of tone she used right before something terrible happened. The girls are talking about it. They say you were tied to a tree and that disgusting animal chewed you loose. They say the Alpha spoke to you himself. I said nothing. There was no safe answer. They say he's keeping you in his camp. She stepped closer. Bones growled. She looked at him with open disgust. That thing should be put down. Please leave us alone, Marietta. The words came out before I could stop them. A week ago I would never have said them. But something had shifted in me since the tree, since the ropes, and the horse, and the sound of my ribs breaking, and the sight of a 30-pound stray dog standing between me and an army. I had already been offered as a sacrifice. I had already been trampled and broken. What else could Marietta do to me that the world had not already done? Her eyes widened. Then they narrowed. You dare. The Omega is under the Alpha's protection. The voice came from behind Marietta, and she spun around so fast she nearly lost her footing. A warrior stood there, not one of the largest, but lean and hard, with close-cropped hair and scars across his knuckles. His arms were folded across his chest, and his amber eyes were fixed on Marietta with the patient intensity of someone who could wait all day for a reason to act. I wasn't, Marietta stammered. Walk away, the warrior said. That was all. 2 words, spoken without heat, and Marietta walked away. She did not look back, but I could feel the fury radiating from her like heat from a fire, and I knew this was not over. With Marietta, it was never over. The warrior glanced at me. His expression did not soften, but it did not harden either. The Alpha said, "You are not to be touched. I am making sure that is understood." He turned and left without waiting for a response. I stood there with my firewood and my dog and my aching ribs and tried to understand what was happening. For 5 years I had been invisible, less than invisible, a thing to be stepped on and forgotten. Now the most powerful Alpha in the Wolf Kingdom had placed a shield around me, and I did not know why. He saw us, Joy whispered from deep inside me. He saw Bones stand for you. That is why. Maybe. Or maybe he was collecting broken things the way some men collected weapons. Not out of kindness, but because broken things were easier to own. I picked up my wood and kept walking. That night I could not sleep. The supply tent was cold, and the wool blanket was thin, and my ribs throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that no amount of herbs could quiet. Bones was curled against my stomach, his warmth the only comfort I had, and I lay in the dark and listened to the camp sounds, the distant murmur of warriors on night watch, the crackle of dying fires, the occasional howl from the perimeter patrols. I thought about the tree. I thought about the ropes cutting into my wrists and the blank faces of the men who tied them. I thought about how none of them hesitated, how they had decided, as a group, without argument, that I was the one to leave behind. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I was the easiest to lose. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone. Not the cruelty. I was used to cruelty. But the ease of it, the way they had weighed my life against their fear and found it lighter than air. I pressed my face into Bones's fur and breathed in his smell. Dirt, warmth, something wild. He shifted and licked my forehead. "You didn't weigh me," I whispered to him. "You didn't even think about it. You just came." He thumped his tail once. I closed my eyes. I was almost asleep when I heard it. Footsteps outside the tent. Heavy, deliberate. Not the patrol moved in pairs and their steps were synchronized. This was one person, and they stopped directly outside the tent flap. Bones lifted his head. His ears rotated forward, and a low rumble started in his chest. I put my hand on him. Shh! The flap did not open. Whoever was there stood outside in the dark for what felt like a full minute, and then the footsteps retreated. Slow, unhurried. The way a man walks when he is not hiding, but simply choosing not to be seen. I lay there with my heart hammering and Bones rigid beside me, and wondered if I had imagined it. But the scent lingered at the tent flap, faint, almost lost in the night air, but unmistakable. Earth, iron, something deep. The Alpha had come to check on me, and he had not come in. "Mate," Joy breathed. The word was so quiet I almost missed it. "He is our mate, Lyla." I squeezed my eyes shut. No, that was not possible. The moon goddess would not be that cruel, to pair the lowest Omega alive with the most powerful Alpha in the wolf kingdom. It was a joke, a punishment, another curse in a life made entirely of curses. It is not a curse. Joy's voice was stronger now, more present than she had been in months. Feel it. You know, I did feel it. That was the problem. I felt it in the way my skin had prickled when he crouched near me in the clearing. I felt it in the way his scent cut through the pain and the blood and found something underneath. Something that recognized him the way roots recognize rain. I felt it in the way my heart had lurched when he spoke, not from fear but from something older and deeper that I did not have a name for. But I had been mated before. Alpha Carl had been my mate, and he had rejected me in front of his entire pack, humiliated me, whipped me, starved me, and broken me in every way a person could be broken without actually dying. I had accepted his rejection 5 years ago in a cell full of captives, and I had felt the bond snap like a dry twig, and I had been grateful for the emptiness that followed. I would not survive another rejection, not from Hector, not from a man whose very presence made the air heavier. If he discovered the bond and threw it back in my face, it would finish what the horse and the tree and the ropes had started. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I buried it. I pushed Joy's whisper down into the deepest part of me, under the moonbound and the scar tissue, and the years of learning to make myself small, and I told myself it was nothing. Just a scent on the wind, just a feeling in the dark. Nothing.
This chapter is told from Hector's perspective. The dog was a problem. Not because it was dangerous. It was 30 pounds of bone and bad decisions, with a jaw that could barely close properly. It was a problem because it would not leave the girl. And the girl had been assigned to the medical tent, and the medical tent was 40 paces from my own. And every time I passed it, the dog raised its head and looked at me with those mismatched eyes like it was taking my measure. No animal had ever taken my measure before. They ran, all of them. Wolves, bears, rogues. The moment they caught my scent, they understood what I was and they fled. That was the natural order. I was the apex. Everything below me existed at my discretion. This dog had not received that information. It stood over a dying girl and bared its teeth at me. At me, the alpha of the Spartan vanguard, the man who had killed his first enemy at 14 and had not stopped since. It looked me in the eye and growled, and the growl said very clearly, "You will have to go through me." I respected that. I should not have. Respecting a stray dog was absurd, and my warriors thought so too, though they were wise enough not to say it. But I had spent the last 12 years in a training camp where the only currency was willingness to die for your position, and I had watched hundreds of wolves, strong wolves, warriors bred for combat, fold the moment the cost became real. They would fight to a point. They would bleed to a point. But there was always a line, a place where survival outweighed loyalty, and they would cross it every time. The dog had no line. That interested me more than it should have. I was not a man who thought about women. The training had stripped that from me along with everything else. Comfort, softness, the capacity for idle thought. For 12 years my world had been combat, strategy, pain, and the relentless pursuit of becoming something that could not be killed. Women were a distraction, and distractions were weaknesses, and weaknesses got you and the men beside you dead. I had internalized this so completely that I did not even notice their absence the way the other warriors did. Rona talked about she-wolves constantly. Beta Darius made crude jokes about what he would do when we returned to the pack. Even the most disciplined among us carried a hunger for contact that sharpened over the years into something almost feral. When we finally returned and the madam presented the unmated she-wolves, the warriors descended on them like starving men at a feast. I felt nothing. I looked at the lines of she-wolves with their bright eyes and eager smiles, and I felt absolutely nothing. And I wondered, not for the first time, if the training had broken something in me that could not be repaired. Then I smelled her. It was at the border clearing, standing over a broken body in the dirt. The scent hit me before I saw her face. Underneath the blood and the moonbound and the stink of fear, there was something else. Something clean and deep, like water running over stones in a place no one had ever been. It bypassed my training and my discipline and my 12 years of carefully constructed emptiness and reached into a part of me I did not know still existed. My wolf surged. He had been dormant for years. A controlled presence. A weapon I deployed when needed, and sheathed when not. He surged so hard that I stumbled, and no one noticed because I covered it with a step forward. But inside, my wolf was slamming against my ribs the way a caged animal slams against bars. Mate, mate, mate. I silenced him. I have always been able to silence him. I am not a man who is governed by instinct. I am a man who governs instinct, and I refused, absolutely refused, to let a biological imperative dictate my actions in front of my warriors. But I looked at her. Broken ribs, bloody wrists, a face so thin and bruised that her features were almost lost in the damage. An Omega, the lowest rank, tied to a tree by her own pack and left to die. She was everything I had been trained to disregard. Weak, damaged, worthless by every metric the lichen world used to measure value, and a stray dog was willing to die for her. I am a strategic man. I understand leverage and power and the calculus of survival. But standing in that clearing, looking at a 30-pound mutt with a torn ear and bleeding gums who refused to step aside, I understood something the 12 years of training had not taught me. There are things in this world that cannot be measured, and they are the only things worth a damn. I did not claim her as my mate. I could not. Not there, not then, not with blood on her lips and bones broken and my warriors watching. Claiming a mate was a vulnerability, and vulnerabilities were weapons in the hands of your enemies. I had enemies. Every alpha did. So I did the only thing I could do without exposing either of us. I claimed the dog, and through the dog I claimed her. You will belong to the beast that saved you, and the master who owns him. It was a riddle. She would not understand it. That was the point. No one would understand it except me, and later, when she was healed, when the camp was secure, when I had identified every threat and neutralized every variable, I would decide what to do about the impossible fact that the moon goddess had paired me with a broken Omega and a stray dog. Until then, she would be protected. No one would touch her. No one would harm her. And if that lean-faced she-wolf from the Titan pack came near her again, I would deal with that personally. I went to her tent that night. I did not go in. I stood outside in the dark like a fool and listened to her breathe. Shallow, careful breaths that hitched when her ribs shifted, and I smelled her scent through the canvas, and my wolf pressed against the inside of my chest so hard I thought my sternum would crack. Go in, claim her. She is ours. She is injured, I told him. She is afraid. She has been broken by men like us, and if I walk in there now, I will be one more alpha taking what he wants from an omega who cannot say no. She is ours. Not yet. Not like this. I walked away. It was the hardest thing I had done since the training, and the training had nearly killed me 7 times. Rona was waiting at my tent. He was my oldest warrior, loyal and blunt, and he had a bandage on his hand where the dog had bitten him. He looked at me and said nothing for a long time, which meant he was about to say something I did not want to hear. You went to the Omega's tent, he said. I went for a walk. Your walk ended at the Omega's tent. I stared at him. Rona was one of 3 people in the world who could hold my gaze without flinching, and he used that privilege liberally. The camp is my responsibility, I said. I check on all sectors. You have never checked on the supply sector before. Rona. Hector. We stared at each other. He was not smiling. Rona rarely smiled, but there was something in his eyes that might have been amusement in a man who had not spent 12 years having his emotions beaten out of him. The warriors are talking, he said. About the girl. About the dog. About the fact that you, the man who has never looked twice at a she-wolf, personally intervened for an omega from a conquered pack. They are drawing conclusions. Let them. Conclusions that could be used against you. I knew that. I had calculated it. The risk was manageable. For now. The warriors respected strength, and protecting a weak creature was not a weakness if framed correctly. It was dominance. It was an alpha exercising absolute authority over everything in his territory, including which lives were spared and which were not. That was the narrative I had constructed, and it would hold. Unless they discovered the bond. I am aware of the risks, I said. Rona studied me for another moment, then nodded. He was loyal enough to warn me and wise enough not to push. The dog bit through my glove, he said, lifting his bandaged hand. His jaw is crooked, but his teeth are sharp where it counts. There was something in his voice that sounded, against all odds, like respect. Good, I said. Rona left. I sat in my tent in the dark and thought about a girl with broken ribs who had whispered, "Please leave us alone," to a she-wolf twice her rank, and a dog who had bitten through leather to protect her, and the impossible, inconvenient, catastrophic fact that my wolf was howling her name inside my chest and would not stop.
2 weeks after the Spartans took the pack, I could move without wanting to die. The ribs were still broken. Healer Zara said they would take another month to heal fully, maybe longer with the moonbound damage. But the sharp, breath-stealing agony had dulled to a deep ache that I could work through if I was careful. I had been working through pain my entire life. This was just a different flavor. Madame Lena had been reassigned from the bar to the Spartan camp kitchen, and she had requested me as her helper. Not out of kindness. Madame Lena did not do kindness, but because I was the only slave who knew her systems, and the Spartan warriors ate 3 times the amount of a normal wolf. The kitchen was chaos from dawn to dark, and I was grateful for it. Chaos left no room for thinking, and thinking was dangerous because every thought I had eventually circled back to him. I saw Hector every day. The camp was not large enough to avoid him, and he had a habit of appearing in places I did not expect. The training ground when I crossed it to fetch water, the weapon racks when I passed to collect firewood, the kitchen entrance when I carried out waste. He never spoke to me. He never looked at me directly. But he was there, and every time, my traitorous body lit up like a torch, and joy pressed against my ribs from the inside and whispered his name. I ignored her. I was very good at ignoring things that would destroy me. The trouble started on a Tuesday. I was carrying a pot of stew from the kitchen to the warriors' mess tent, a heavy iron pot that made my ribs ache with every step, when Marietta appeared in my path. She was not alone. 2 other she-wolves flanked her, both from the Titan pack, both taller and stronger than me. They had the look of women who had been coached, their anger too precise to be spontaneous. Bones growled at my side. I set the pot down slowly because I knew what was coming, and I did not want scalding stew on my skin when it arrived. "Lyla," Marietta said. Her smile was beautiful and empty. "I have a message from my mother, Madame Teresa." Even the name made my skin tighten. I had not seen her since the Spartans arrived, and I had allowed myself to hope, foolishly, stupidly, that the new order had rendered her powerless. "She wants to know why you told the madam's assistant that the Alpha rejected you. You spoke for the Alpha without his permission," Marietta said, her voice rising. Loud enough for others to hear. That was the point. She wanted an audience. "You put words in his mouth. That is a punishable offense, Omega." The 2 she-wolves stepped closer. Bones snarled and snapped his crooked jaw, but one of them kicked dirt at him and he flinched sideways. He was brave, my dog, but he was small, and there were 3 of them. "Hold the mutt," Marietta said, and one of the she-wolves grabbed Bones by the scruff. He yelped and thrashed, and something inside me cracked open. Not broke, cracked. The way a seed cracks before it grows. "Let go of my dog." My voice did not shake. It surprised me as much as it surprised Marietta. She blinked, then laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Your dog. You own nothing, Omega. You are nothing. You—" I said, "Let go of my dog." I did not raise my voice. I did not step forward. But something in my tone made the she-wolf holding Bones hesitate. And in that hesitation, Bones twisted free and scrambled behind my legs, pressing his shaking body against my calves. Marietta's face darkened. She stepped toward me and grabbed my arm, the burned one, Madame Teresa's iron mark. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face, and I said the thing I had never said to anyone in my entire life. "If you do not let go of me, I will scream, and everyone in this camp will hear it, including the Alpha." Marietta's hand tightened, then released. She stepped back, and her face was a mask of fury so complete that it was almost beautiful. "You think he will protect you forever?" she hissed. "You think the Alpha cares about a cursed Omega and her filthy mutt? He is using you. When he is done, he will throw you away like every Alpha before him, and I will be there to watch." She turned and walked away. The 2 she-wolves followed. I stood there with Bones pressed against my legs and my arm throbbing and my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had threatened Marietta. I had threatened the daughter of my former mistress, the woman who had whipped me and burned me and injected me with moonbound until my wolf was barely a ghost. I had looked her in the eye and told her I would scream, and she had believed me. My hands were shaking, my whole body was shaking. But underneath the fear, deep in the place where joy lived, something stirred. Not my wolf, not exactly. Something older. Something that had been sleeping under the moonbound and the scars and the years of submission, waiting for a reason to wake up. "Good," Joy said. Her voice was clearer than it had been in months. "That was good, Lyla." I picked up the pot of stew. My ribs screamed. Bones pressed his warm body against my leg, and we walked to the mess tent together. I did not see the Alpha that day. But that evening, when I returned to the supply tent, there was something on my blanket that had not been there before. A bone. A fresh one, thick with marrow, the kind that came from the warrior's table and never made it to the slaves' meals. It was wrapped in a strip of hide, and beside it sat a small clay jar sealed with wax. I opened the jar and smelled the sharp, clean scent of healing salve, the real kind, not the watered-down version Healer Zara rationed out. This was from the Alpha's personal supply. I knew because I had cleaned his tent. I knew what he kept and where he kept it. There was no note, no explanation, just a bone for the dog and medicine for the girl. Bones pounced on the bone and gnawed it with his crooked jaw, his tail wagging so hard his whole body swayed. I sat on my blanket with the salve in my hands and stared at it for a long time. He had been watching. He knew about Marietta. He knew about my arm. And instead of confronting Marietta himself, instead of using his power the way every alpha I had ever known used power, with violence and spectacle. He had left a bone and a jar of salve on a blanket in a supply tent, quietly, without witness, without expectation. I pressed my face into my hands and breathed. I would not cry. I had not cried since the tree, and I would not start now. Crying was weakness, and weakness was a luxury, and I was an omega who could not afford luxuries. But my chest ached with something that was not my ribs, and joy was humming inside me. Actually humming, a low warm sound that I had not felt since before Alpha Carl broke me. I applied the salve to the burn on my arm. It cooled the pain immediately, sinking into my skin like water into dry earth. Then I lay down on my blanket with Bones beside me, his jaw working the marrow bone, his tail still wagging, and I stared at the tent roof and thought about an alpha who checked on me in the dark and left gifts he would never admit to. I thought about Marietta's words, "He is using you. When he is done, he will throw you away." Maybe she was right. Maybe this was just another alpha playing games with an omega's life. Maybe the bone and the salve were nothing, a man maintaining his property the way you oil a blade or patch a tent. But Alpha Carl never left me anything. Not once, in all the years of our bond, did he give me a single thing that was not pain. He never checked on me in the dark. He never silenced a warrior who yelled at me. He never looked at me the way Hector had looked at me in the clearing. Not through me, not past me, but at me, as if I was a thing worth seeing. That was the difference. That was the thing that kept me awake, staring at the tent roof with the salve cooling my burn and Bones snoring beside me and Joy humming her quiet song. Alpha Carl saw an omega. He saw a curse. He saw a burden. Hector saw a girl that a dog would die for, and he wanted to know why. That was enough. For now, it was enough. Lyla. A month after my ribs were shattered, healer Zara unwrapped the last of my bindings and pressed her fingers along the bones with the concentration of someone reading a map. I held my breath. Not because of the pain, though there was still pain, a deep structural ache that I suspected would live in me forever, but because Zara's face was unreadable, and I had learned that unreadable faces in healers meant they were deciding how much truth you could survive. "The bones have knitted," she said finally, "unevenly. You'll have a ridge along your 4th and 5th ribs for the rest of your life, and deep breaths will hurt in cold weather. But you will not puncture a lung if you sneeze." "Thank you, healer Zara." She looked at me with those clinical eyes that occasionally betrayed something warmer underneath. "Don't thank me. Thank whatever is keeping your wolf suppressed. If Joy had tried to heal you at full strength, she would have accelerated the bone growth and fused your ribs to your sternum. The moonbound actually saved you, in a backwards way. I did not know how to feel about that. The poison that had caged my wolf for 5 years had also kept me alive. My whole life was built on contradictions like that, the things meant to destroy me finding accidental ways to preserve me instead. Bones waited outside the medical tent. He'd been barred from entering after he growled at Zara's assistant for touching my bandages, and he sat by the tent flap with the patient misery of a dog who understood rules but disagreed with them on principle. When I emerged, he leapt up and pressed his nose into my palm, and his tail went wild. "I'm okay, boy." I crouched and scratched behind his torn ear. He leaned into my hand so hard he almost toppled. "I'm okay." I was not okay, but I was standing and breathing and my ribs were holding, and the morning sun was warm on my face and Bones was leaning against me like I was the center of his entire world. That was close enough. The camp had changed in the month I had spent healing. What began as a military staging ground had evolved into something more permanent. The Spartans were not passing through. They were absorbing. The Titan Pack's territory was being reorganized under Hector's command, and the structures reflected it. Wooden barracks replacing canvas tents, a proper armory built from felled timber. Training grounds expanded and formalized with weapon stations and sparring rings. The Titan wolves who had surrendered were being integrated, given roles, assigned duties, evaluated for usefulness. Those deemed worthy were offered positions in the lower ranks. Those deemed useless were given labor assignments. No one was killed. That surprised everyone, especially the Titan wolves who had braced themselves for slaughter. Hector was ruthless. Every story confirmed it. But he was not wasteful. Dead wolves produced nothing. Living wolves, properly placed, produced value. It was a cold calculus, but it was a calculus that kept people alive, and I understood it better than most because I had spent my entire life on the wrong side of that equation. My assignment had shifted. Madame Lyla still ran the kitchen, but I had been quietly moved to a new role, tending the herb garden behind the medical tent. Healer Zara had requested it, citing my careful hands and low likelihood of breaking anything valuable. I suspected the real reason was that Zara wanted to keep me close enough to monitor my ribs, but I did not question it. The garden was peaceful. It smelled of rosemary and sage and the earthy dampness of turned soil, and Bones could lie in the sun beside me while I worked, and for stretches of time, 10 minutes, 20, sometimes a full hour, I could forget what I was. It was in the garden that I first spoke to Beta Darius. He arrived without announcement, which was unusual for a man his size. Darius was the second largest warrior in the Spartan ranks. Only Hector eclipsed him. And he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that carelessness at his scale caused damage. His head was shaved, his jaw was a slab of granite, and his forearms were thicker than my thighs. He looked like he had been assembled from leftover siege equipment. Bones raised his head and growled. Darius looked at the dog and grunted. It was not a threatening grunt. It was the sound of a man acknowledging another male's presence and deciding not to contest it. "You are the Omega," Darius said. "Not a question." "Yes, Beta." I kept my eyes on the soil. Old habits. The one the dog stood over, yes. He was quiet for a moment. I could feel him studying me the way warriors study terrain. Not with cruelty, but with the tactical awareness of someone who categorizes everything as either a threat, an asset, or irrelevant. "The Alpha has called a gathering tonight," he said. "All pack members, including the Titan wolves. Including you." My hands stilled in the soil. A gathering meant visibility. Visibility meant danger. I usually don't attend gatherings. I'm just a... The Alpha was specific, all pack members. He used the word all twice. Darius looked at Bones, then back at me. "Bring the dog." He turned and walked away, and I sat in the dirt with rosemary under my fingernails, and my heart climbing into my throat. The gathering took place at dusk in the central clearing that had once been the Titan Pack ceremony ground. Torches ringed the space, casting jumping shadows across the faces of hundreds of wolves, Spartans and Titans alike, warriors and she-wolves, and the handful of children who had survived the transition. The air hummed with tension and curiosity. Gatherings under the old Alpha had been formal, predictable affairs. No one knew what to expect from Hector. I stood at the very back of the crowd, half hidden behind a supply cart, with Bones pressed against my legs. Madame Lyla had allowed me to leave the kitchen early with a grunt that might have been permission, or might have been gas. Marietta was somewhere in the crowd. I could feel her gaze like a needle between my shoulder blades, but I did not look for her. Looking for danger only summoned it faster. The crowd parted, and Hector walked into the center of the clearing. He was in full regalia, black hide armor, weapons belt, the dark tattoos on his chest visible above the neckline. His warriors flanked him in a 5 formation, Rona on his left, Darius on his right, and behind them, a dozen of the largest lichens I had ever seen. They moved as one, a machine of muscle and discipline, and the crowd fell silent without being told. Hector stood in the torchlight and surveyed the pack. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, touching every face. When they passed over the place where I stood, I felt it like a hand on my skin, brief, electric, gone before I could react. Joy stirred. I pushed her down. "The Titan Pack is no more," Hector said. His voice carried without effort, filling the clearing like a physical force. Its territory, its resources, and its people now belong to the Spartan Lycan order. This is not a conquest. It is a correction. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Titan wolves shifted uneasily. The Spartans stood like stone. "The former leadership of this pack failed you," Hector continued. "They left you undefended. They let rogues multiply at your borders. They fed their own comfort while their warriors grew soft in their omegas." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're treated as less than wolves." I stopped breathing. "Under my rule, every wolf serves a purpose, and every wolf that serves is protected. Rank is not a birthright. It is earned. Strength is not measured by who you dominate, but by what you defend. He paused. The silence was absolute. 1 month ago, I watched a pack tie one of their own to a tree and leave her as an offering to my army. The crowd tensed. I felt the blood drain from my face. He was talking about me. In front of everyone. In front of Marietta. In front of the warriors who had tied the ropes. She was an Omega. The lowest rank. Cursed, they called her. Worthless. They calculated that her life was cheaper than their fear, and they were wrong. His eyes did not find me. He was too disciplined for that, too aware that looking at me now would expose something he was not ready to expose. But his words found me. They found me, like his scent found me in the dark, cutting through everything else, and landing in the place where joy lived. A stray dog, an animal with no rank, no pack, no power, showed more loyalty to that girl than her entire pack. He stood over her broken body and faced my army with nothing but his teeth, bones, as if sensing the shift in the crowd's attention, pressed harder against my legs. I put my hand on his head to steady us both. That dog understood something that many of you have forgotten. Loyalty is not a calculation. It is not weighed against cost. It does not factor in rank or strength or what you stand to gain. It is absolute, or it is nothing. He let the words settle. The torchlight danced across his face, and in that moment, he did not look like a warlord. He looked like a man who had spent 12 years in a cage of discipline and duty, and was now for the first time saying something he actually believed. From this day forward, the wolves who left her at that tree are stripped of rank. They will serve in the labor detail until they demonstrate the loyalty they failed to show when it mattered. Gasps from the crowd. I saw movement near the front. The tall warrior who had tied my wrists, his face slack with shock. Beside him, his companions looked like men who had just heard their own death sentence. And the Omega. Hector's voice dropped, just slightly, just enough that I felt the change in my chest like a shift in gravity, is under my direct protection. She is not a slave, she is not an offering. She is a member of this pack, and she will be treated as such. Anyone who harms her will answer to me. Personally. The word personally landed like a hammer on stone. Every wolf in that clearing understood what it meant. Not a trial, not a punishment delegated to subordinates. Hector himself, the man who had killed more enemies than anyone in living memory, who had never lost a fight, whose very name made alpha wolves lower their eyes. The crowd was silent. Not the respectful silence of agreement, but the stunned silence of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Hector turned and walked back through the formation of his warriors. The gathering dispersed slowly, the way crowds disperse after earthquakes, in small, dazed groups, speaking in hushed voices, casting glances toward the place where I stood. I did not move. I could not. My legs were locked, my hands trembling, my eyes burning with something I refused to name. Bones whined and licked my fingers. He had not claimed me as his mate. He had not revealed the bond. But he had done something almost worse. He had given me value. In front of the entire pack, the alpha of all alphas had declared that I mattered, and he had used the story of a stray dog to make them understand why. He sees you, Joy whispered. He has always seen you. I pressed my face into my hands and stood there until the torches burned low and the clearing emptied, and the night wrapped around me in bones like a blanket. Then I walked back to my supply tent on legs that felt like water, and I lay on my blanket, and for the first time in 5 years, I cried. Not from pain, from the unbearable, terrifying, bone-deep weight of being seen.
This chapter is told from Hector's perspective. I made a tactical error at the gathering, and I knew it the moment I walked away. Not the speech itself. The speech was calculated. The former Titan leadership had created a culture of expendability, and I needed to dismantle it publicly. Stripping the warriors who tied her to the tree was a power move, a message to every wolf in the pack that the old rules were dead. Announcing her protection was a territorial claim, the kind alphas make over resources and borders. All of it was defensible. All of it made strategic sense. The error was the way I spoke about the dog. Loyalty is not a calculation. It is absolute, or it is nothing. Those were not the words of a commander establishing order. Those were the words of a man who had been thinking about a stray dog for a month straight, and had not slept properly in weeks because his wolf would not stop howling at the walls of his chest. Rona noticed. Of course Rona noticed. He said nothing at the gathering. He was too disciplined for that. But afterward, in my tent, he stood with his arms folded and his bandaged hand resting against his ribs and looked at me with the flat patience of a man waiting for a confession. "Say it," I told him. "You spoke about the dog like a man speaks about a mirror." I did not answer. Rona had a talent for precision that bordered on cruelty. "The warriors heard it," he continued. "Most of them are too thick to read between your words, but Darius heard it. Warrior Sable heard it. And if the Titan she-wolves have any intelligence at all, they heard it too." "Heard what exactly?" "That you care about the Omega, not as property, not as a statement. You care about her." The word care landed in the tent like a blade. "She is my mate," I said. I did not plan to say it. The words left my mouth the way a blade leaves a sheath. Clean, inevitable, already in motion before the decision to draw. Rona's face did not change. Not a flinch, not a blink. He had suspected. Maybe he had known. "How long?" he asked. "Since the clearing. Does she know?" "She suspects. She has not acknowledged it." "Have you?" "No." Rona was quiet for a long time. The tent candles flickered. Outside, the camp settled into its nighttime rhythms. Patrols rotating, the kitchen fire dying to embers, the distant sound of warriors sparring in the moonlight because men who had spent 12 years training did not know how to stop. "The bond will be discovered," Rona said. "If not by your wolves, then by hers. The Titan she-wolves are watching her. The one called Marietta, she is building allies among the Titan females. She wants to be the Alpha's chosen mate, and she will destroy anything that stands between her and that position." I knew this. I had been tracking Marietta's movements since the second week. She was smarter than she appeared, calculating, patient, willing to play a long game. Her mother, Madame Teresa, had been the former Beta's mate and retained influence among the older Titan wolves. Together they were building a quiet coalition, positioning Marietta as the ideal candidate for a political mating with the new Alpha. In another life, I might have considered it. A political mate from a conquered pack's former leadership would cement loyalty and stabilize the transition. It was the rational move, the strategic move, but my wolf had chosen, and wolves do not unchoose. "What do you want me to do?" Rona asked. "Nothing yet. Watch Marietta. Watch her mother. If they move against the Omega, I want to know before they act." "And the bond?" I stared at the candle flame. It threw dancing shadows on the tent walls, and I thought of a girl lying in a supply tent with a stray dog and a jar of salve I had left without a note because I did not know how to give a gift and could not bring myself to try. "I will tell her when she is ready. She may never be ready, Hector. You read her scent the same as I do. She has been rejected before. Whatever Alpha had her. He did not just reject her. He dismantled her. She carries that damage in every breath." I knew. I could smell it on her. The faint, sour undertone beneath her natural scent, the olfactory signature of prolonged suffering. It was layered under the moonbound and the scar tissue, embedded so deeply that it had become part of her chemistry. Whoever Alpha Carl was, he had not merely hurt her. He had rewritten her at a molecular level to believe she was worthless. I had killed men for less than what that Alpha had done to her. "She will be ready," I said, "or she won't. Either way, she is protected." Rona studied me for another moment, then nodded once and left. He did not wish me good night. We did not do that. We had spent 12 years sleeping in shifts in hostile territory, and good night implied a safety that neither of us believed in. I sat in the dark and thought about a girl who cried in a supply tent because someone told her she mattered, and I understood, with the cold clarity that had kept me alive through everything, that this was going to be the hardest fight of my life. Not because of Marietta, not because of politics or pack dynamics or the fragile architecture of a newly conquered territory. Because I was going to have to convince a woman who had been taught that she was nothing, that she was worth everything. And I was a man who had been trained to destroy things, not build them. I did not know how to be gentle. I did not know how to be patient. I did not know how to hold something without breaking it. But the dog knew. The ugly, crooked-jawed, half-starved mutt who had no training and no strategy and no tactical awareness whatsoever. He knew exactly how to love her. He did it by showing up, by staying, by standing between her and everything that wanted to hurt her, not because he was strong enough to win, but because leaving was not something his heart could calculate. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe the dog had been teaching me since the clearing, and I had been too armored to listen. Stop calculating. Start standing.
This chapter is told from Lyla's perspective. Lyla. The days after the gathering were the strangest of my life. People looked at me, not through me, not past me, not with the sneering contempt I had worn like a second skin for 5 years. They looked at me, briefly, cautiously, the way you look at something you are reassessing. Some of them nodded. A few of the Titan she-wolves who had never spoken to me before offered tight, uncertain smiles. One of the kitchen workers set an extra portion on my plate when she thought Madame Lena was not watching. I did not know what to do with any of it. I had been invisible for so long that visibility felt like standing naked in a room full of strangers. Every pair of eyes was a potential threat, every nod a setup for something cruel. I kept waiting for the catch, the moment when the protection would be revealed as a joke or a test, or a mistake that would be corrected with a whip. But the catch did not come. Days became a week became 2. The warrior who had stopped Marietta in the supply area, his name was Sable, I learned, passed the herb garden twice a day on what was clearly a patrol route that had been adjusted to include my vicinity. Healer Zara gave me a second blanket without being asked. And the gifts continued. Every few days I would return to my tent and find something. A strip of dried meat for bones, a bundle of clean rags that could be fashioned into bandages for my arm, a pair of leather shoes, used, too large, but infinitely better than the torn cloth I had been wrapping around my feet. Once, a small wooden comb with 3 teeth missing, left on my blanket like a secret. Never a note, never a cent. Whoever delivered these things was careful, and I did not need to guess who had sent them because there was only one person in this camp with the authority to requisition supplies without question and the discipline to cover his tracks. I used the comb that night. My hair had been tangled for so long that it took an hour to work through the knots, and 2 of the remaining teeth broke in the process. But when I was done, I ran my fingers through it and felt something I could not identify. It was not vanity. I had been told I was ugly so many times that the word had lost its sting and settled into a fact I no longer questioned. It was something simpler. Maintenance. The act of taking care of a thing because someone, somewhere, implied it was worth taking care of. Bones watched me comb my hair with his head on his paws and his tail doing a slow, lazy wag. I looked at him and said, "Don't judge me." He wagged harder. 3 weeks after the gathering, Marietta made her move. It did not start with me. It started with Bones. I was in the herb garden, kneeling between rows of lavender, when Bones lifted his head and barked, a sharp, alarmed bark I had not heard before. He scrambled to his feet and shot around the corner of the medical tent before I could call him back. I heard his barking escalate into frantic, high-pitched yelps, and then a sound that turned my blood to ice. A dog screaming. I ran. My ribs protested, but I did not care. I rounded the medical tent and found Bones in the narrow alley between the tent and the barracks wall. And he was not alone. 2 of Marietta's she-wolves stood over him. One of them held a wooden staff. Bones was on the ground, his back leg twisted at a wrong angle, and he was yelping in a way I had never heard, a sound that was not anger or defiance but pure, bewildered pain. The she-wolf with the staff raised it again. I do not remember crossing the distance. I do not remember making a sound, but I remember the staff in my hands. I remember ripping it from the she-wolf's grip, with a strength that should not have existed in my body, a strength that came from somewhere beneath my muscles, beneath my bones, from the very marrow of me. She stumbled back, her eyes wide, and I stood between them and my dog with the staff in my hands and my chest heaving and something rising in me that I had never felt before. It was not anger. Anger was something I had felt and endured and swallowed 1,000 times. This was rage, pure, clean, clarifying rage, the kind that does not cloud your vision but sharpens it, that does not make you tremble but makes you still. I could see everything, the she-wolf's fear, her companion's retreat, the sweat on their skin, the guilty dart of their eyes, and behind them, barely visible in the shadow of the barracks, a third figure. Marietta. Watching, not participating, never participating. She always used other people's hands. "You hurt my dog." My voice came from a place I did not recognize. Low, steady, emptied of everything except the fact. "You broke his leg." "It's just a mutt," the she-wolf stammered. "It bit Farah last week, and he is under the Alpha's protection." The words fell like stones. The she-wolves flinched. Marietta in the shadows went very still. So am I. I dropped the staff. I knelt beside Bones and gathered him as gently as I could. He whimpered and pressed his face into my neck, and his body shook against mine, and the rage in my chest burned hotter and colder at the same time. I carried him to the medical tent. He was heavier than he looked, or maybe my arms were weaker than my rage, but I held him, and I walked. And the camp blurred around me because my eyes were full of something that was not tears. It was heat and fury, and the absolute, unshakable knowledge that I would kill anyone who touched this animal again. Healer Zara took one look at my face and cleared her table without a word. Bones's back left leg was broken in 2 places. Zara set it with the same efficient competence she had used on my ribs, splinting the bone with thin strips of wood and binding it tight. Bones endured it with the stoic patience of a creature who understood pain as a baseline condition of existence, and I held his head in my lap and whispered things that meant nothing. "Good boy, you're okay, I'm here," because the words were not for him. They were for me. "Who did this?" Zara asked as she worked. "Marietta's people." Zara's hands did not pause, but her jaw tightened. "The Alpha will hear about this." "No." Zara looked up. Her eyebrows climbed. "No?" I was surprising myself again. "The old Lyla, the Lyla from a month ago, from a year ago, from the entirety of my broken life, would have wanted the Alpha to handle it. Would have waited for someone stronger, someone with authority, someone who mattered, to step in and make it stop. That Lyla understood her place in the world, at the bottom, looking up, hoping the boot above her would land somewhere else. But that Lyla had not ripped a staff from a she-wolf's hands. "I will handle it," I said. Zara studied me for a long moment, then something shifted in her clinical eyes, a warmth, brief and quickly controlled but real. "The bone will heal in 3 weeks if he stays off it. I will make him a brace. And Lyla, yes? Whatever you are planning, be careful. Marietta is not her mother. She's smarter. She won't attack you directly. She'll use the pack's structures against you, and she'll do it in a way that looks like your fault." I looked down at Bones. His milky eye was half closed, and his tail gave a weak thump when I stroked his ear. His leg was braced and splinted, and his breathing was steadier, and he looked up at me with the unquestioning trust of a creature who had decided a long time ago that wherever I was, he was safe. He had stood between me and an army. The least I could do was stand between him and a girl with a grudge. I waited until nightfall. The camp settled into its routines. Fires banked, patrols dispatched, the kitchen cleaned and shuttered. Bones slept in the medical tent under Zara's watch, his broken leg propped on a folded blanket, his nose tucked under his tail. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "I'll be back," and walked out into the dark. I did not go to the Alpha's tent. I did not seek out Warrior Sable or any of the Spartan guards who had been assigned to watch over me. I went to Marietta's tent. She was alone when I pulled back the flap. She sat on her fur with a polished bronze mirror in her hand, running a brush through her hair, beautiful hair, thick and dark, the kind of hair that men wrote songs about. She looked up when I entered, and her expression cycled through surprise, contempt, and something that might have been fear before settling on the cold, polished mask she wore like armor. "You don't have permission to be in my tent, Omega. You didn't have permission to break my dog's leg." I stepped inside. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure she could hear it, but my voice was steady, and my hands did not shake. The rage from earlier had cooled into something harder, something with edges. I was not here to fight. I was here to deliver a message. I know what you're doing, Marietta. I kept my voice low, not from fear, but because what I was about to say did not need volume. You're building a coalition. You're positioning yourself as the Alpha's chosen. You think that if you eliminate me, the obstacle, the cursed Omega who somehow got the Alpha's attention, you'll have a clear path to his side. Marietta set down her mirror. Her eyes were hard. You don't know anything about. I know you sent those girls to hurt Bones because you couldn't hurt me directly. I know your mother is talking to the Titan elders about a political mating. And I know that you are afraid of me, which is the strangest thing that has ever happened in my life, because 6 months ago I was scrubbing your floors. The silence between us was a living thing. Marietta's mask cracked, just slightly, just at the edges, and beneath it I saw the truth. She was afraid, not of me, of what I represented. The Alpha's favor was the only currency she had left in this new order, and my existence threatened it in a way she could not control. I am not your enemy, I said. I do not want the Alpha's position. I do not want your mother's influence. I do not want anything except to be left alone with my dog. But if you touch Bones again, if anyone you know touches Bones again, I will not go to the Alpha. I will not go to Warrior Sable. I will come to you, and I will tell you to your face, and then I will tell the entire pack what you did and let them decide what the Alpha's promise of protection means. I turned and walked out of her tent. My legs did not buckle until I was 3 tents away, behind a stack of supply crates where no one could see. I pressed my back against the wood and slid to the ground and wrapped my arms around my knees and shook. Great, convulsive tremors that rattled my teeth and made my healed ribs throb. I had just confronted Marietta, alone, in her own tent, without permission, without protection, without anyone telling me I could. Joy was laughing inside me. Not mocking, joyful, the kind of laughter that comes from a cage door swinging open. There you are, she said. I have been waiting for you. I sat in the dark behind the supply crates and trembled and laughed and cried all at once, and Bones was not beside me, but I could feel him, 3 tents away, sleeping with his broken leg propped on a blanket, his crooked jaw resting on his paws, dreaming whatever dogs dream about. He had taught me to stand. Now I was learning to stand alone. I was halfway back to the medical tent when the scent stopped me. Earth, iron. The deep pulling thing that lived underneath. Hector stood in the shadow between 2 barracks, arms folded, his back against the wooden wall. He was watching me, not from a distance, from 10 feet away, close enough that the torchlight from the nearest patrol path caught the green of his eyes and turned them luminous. He had been there the whole time. He had watched me go into Marietta's tent and come out again. My trembling stopped, or rather it changed. Became something else, something warmer. Something that started in my chest and radiated outward until my fingertips buzzed. You went to her tent, he said. His voice was quiet, not angry, not approving, just noting. She broke my dog's leg, I know. Sable reported it an hour ago. And you didn't do anything? He was quiet for a moment. I was going to. Then I saw you walking toward her tent, and I wanted to see what you would do. Something turned over inside me. You let me face her alone. You stood here and I stood here and watched you not need me. The words landed in my chest like a fist. Not a blow. A hand, pressing flat against my sternum, steadying me the way Bones steadied me with his warm weight against my leg. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. I closed it. Hector pushed off the wall and took 1 step toward me. Just 1. He was still 6 feet away, still careful, still maintaining the distance that allowed us both to pretend this was something other than what it was. You are not what they told you, he said. You are not cursed. You are not worthless. You are not ugly. My throat closed. I shook my head. Not in denial, but because I could not process the words. They were too large. They did not fit in the space I had built for myself. the small, dark, careful space where I lived inside my own skin. You walked into a predator's tent with nothing but your voice and made her afraid, Hector continued. His green eyes were steady, unblinking. That is not weakness. That is something I have not seen in warriors twice your size. I was terrified, I whispered. Courage requires terror. Without it, you're just following orders. He held my gaze for another moment, 2, 3, an eternity compressed into seconds, and then he nodded. Once, the way he had nodded at the clearing over my broken body. An acknowledgement, a stamp on something he had already decided. Then he turned and walked into the dark, and I stood in the space between the barracks with the echo of his words ringing in my chest and joy, singing. Actually singing for the first time in years, a wordless, rising note that filled me from the inside out. He had watched me not need him, and instead of rage or disappointment or the jealous possessiveness that every alpha I had ever known wore like a second skin, he had felt. What? What did a man like Hector feel when the broken thing he was protecting proved it had teeth of its own? Pride, Joy whispered. He felt pride. I walked back to the medical tent on legs that did not shake and sat beside my sleeping dog and put my hand on his warm, matted side and breathed. Something was changing. In me, in the space between me and the alpha, who left gifts without notes and watched from shadows and spoke about courage like a man who had earned it in blood. Something was growing in the soil of my chest, fed by bones and salve and a pair of green eyes in the dark. And I did not know what it was yet, but for the first time, I was not afraid of it. For the first time, I wanted to see what it became. Bones healed the way Bones did everything, stubbornly, on his own terms, and with a complete disregard for healer Zara's instructions. She had told him to stay off the leg for 3 weeks. He stayed off it for 4 days. On the 5th morning, I woke to find him limping around the medical tent, sniffing at supply crates and growling at a moth. His splinted leg stuck out at an angle that made him look like a broken compass, and he moved with a hitching, 3-legged gait that should have been pitiful but somehow carried the same stubborn dignity he brought to everything. "Your dog is an idiot," Zara said, watching him from her workbench. "He's brave. Those are the same thing. I could not argue with that." I helped Bones outside into the morning sun, and he flopped onto the warm dirt beside the herb garden and sighed the deep, contented sigh of a dog who had decided that today was acceptable. I sat beside him and pulled weeds and let the quiet settle around us, and for a few minutes the world was small and manageable, and did not contain alphas or enemies, or the complicated architecture of my own heart. Then Warrior Sable appeared at the garden's edge. He was a man of few words, fewer even than Hector, which was an achievement. In the weeks since the gathering, I had learned exactly 3 things about him. He was loyal to Hector with the ferocity of a man who owed him a life debt. He despised Marietta with a quiet intensity that suggested history I did not know. And he was terrified of Bones, though he would never admit it. "The Alpha requests your presence," Sable said. He stood precisely 6 feet from Bones, which I suspected was the exact distance the dog could not cover on 3 legs. My hands stilled in the dirt. My presence? At his tent. Now. My stomach dropped through the earth. In my experience, being summoned to an alpha's tent meant one of 3 things: punishment, humiliation, or demands I could not refuse. Every muscle in my body tightened with the old familiar dread, the kind that lived in my bones, deeper than the moonbound, deeper than the scars, wired into me by years of flinching. "He is not Carl," Joy said, firmly, almost angrily. "He is not Carl, Lyla." I stood. I brushed the dirt from my knees. I looked down at Bones, who was watching me with his one good eye, his tail still. "Stay here, boy. I'll be back," he whined. He did not believe me. I was not sure I believed myself. Hector's tent was larger than the others, not by much, because Hector was not a man who advertised his status through luxury, but enough to accommodate a war table, a weapons rack, a fur-covered sleeping platform, and the faint, persistent scent of leather and iron and the deep, earthy thing underneath that made my lungs forget how to work. He was standing at the war table when I entered, studying a map spread across its surface. He did not look up immediately. I stood just inside the tent flap with my hands clasped in front of me and my heart doing something violent and irregular, and I counted the scars on his back because it was easier than looking at his face. 7. 7 scars that I could see, each one a raised silver line against the dark brown of his skin. I wondered who had given them to him. I wondered if any of them had hurt the way mine hurt, or if men like Hector processed pain differently, filed it away in whatever armored compartment they kept their feelings in and moved on. "Sit," he said without turning. There was one chair. It was positioned at the opposite side of the war table, directly across from where he stood. I sat. The chair was too large for me. Everything in this camp was too large for me, and my feet barely touched the ground. Hector rolled the map and set it aside. Then he sat across from me, and the war table was between us like a border, and his green eyes found mine and held them. "You confronted Marietta 3 nights ago." He leaned forward. The war table was wide, but the distance between us shrank with the motion, and his scent thickened in my lungs, and joy pressed against the inside of my ribs so hard I thought they would crack again. "You are not alone anymore, Lyla." My name. He said my name. He had never said it to my face before. I had been the omega and she and her in every conversation, every command, every public declaration. But here, in the privacy of his tent, with a war table between us and the camp noise muffled by canvas, he said my name, and the sound of it in his voice did something to me that I was not prepared for. It made me real. Not a category, not a rank, not a label. A person. A person with a name that someone chose to learn. "You have been fighting alone your whole life," he continued. "You have been surviving alone. You did not ask for help because no one ever came when you asked, and you stopped believing that help existed. I understand that. But it is no longer true." I stared at him. My eyes burned. My hands, clasped in my lap, were trembling. "If Marietta or anyone else threatens you, you come to me. Not because you cannot handle it. You prove that you can, but because you should not have to." He held my gaze. I held his. The air between us was thick enough to cut, and joy was singing again. That low, rising note that filled my chest and climbed my throat and threatened to spill out of me in a sound I could not control. "Why?" I whispered. The same question I had asked in the supply tent, the first time he told me I was protected. The question I kept asking because his answers kept rearranging the architecture of my understanding. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Hector was still for a long time. His jaw worked, his fingers, resting on the table, flexed once and went still again. I watched the battle play out behind his eyes, the discipline warring with something larger, something that strained against the cage of his control the way joy strained against the moon-bound in mine. He did not answer. Instead, he reached across the table and placed something in front of me. It was small, a strip of leather braided, with a crude wooden clasp. A collar, dog-sized. "For Bones," he said. "A collar marks him as owned property. No wolf in this pack will touch another wolf's property." I picked it up. The leather was soft, hand-worked, not the stiff, cheap kind used for equipment. Someone had spent time on it. The braid was uneven in places, as if the hands that made it were more accustomed to weapons than craft. He made it. The alpha of all alphas sat in his tent and braided a collar for a stray dog with hands that had killed more men than I could count. I pressed the collar against my chest and breathed. "Thank you, Alpha Hector." Something flickered in his eyes, not disappointment, but the shadow of something he had wanted to hear instead. "Hector," he said quietly. "When we are alone, it is just Hector." I left his tent with the collar in my hands and my heart in my throat, and the knowledge that whatever was happening between us had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had asked me to use his name, not his title, not his rank, his name. The name his mother gave him, the name that existed before the training and the scars and the armor. He was letting me see underneath, and underneath was not cold or empty or armored at all. Underneath was a man who braided leather collars for broken dogs, because he did not know how to say what he meant with words.
I braided a collar for a dog, and it broke me open. Not the act itself. I had worked leather before. Every warrior knew basic craft, and braiding was a matter of pattern and tension, no different from weapon maintenance. It was the hour I spent doing it. The deliberateness of it, the way my hands, which had ended more lives than I could tally, moved with a care I did not recognize, turning strips of softened hide over and under and through until they became something that could circle a neck without cutting. I made a collar for her dog because I could not make one for her. That thought arrived unbidden, and I sat with it in the dark of my tent, and my wolf stirred in the way he always stirred when the truth came too close to the surface. A low, restless pacing behind my ribs, circling the cage I had built to contain him. Claim her. The thought was his and mine, indistinguishable. Tell her what she is, what we are. I could not. The reasons were strategic, political, practical, and all of them were lies. The truth, stripped of every justification I had constructed, was simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Not of enemies, not of consequences. I was afraid of the look on her face if I told her we were bonded, and she saw, in that moment, another alpha laying claim to her body and her will. I was afraid that the word mate would land on her the way a fist lands. Not because I intended harm, but because every man who had used that word before me had used it as a weapon. Alpha Carl had not just rejected her. He had weaponized the bond. He had turned the most sacred connection between wolves into a leash, and he had pulled it until she choked. How do you tell a woman the moon goddess chose you for her when every choice the world has ever made for her has been a punishment? I did not know. So I braided a collar for her dog and gave her my name and sat alone in the dark. And my wolf howled at the walls of my chest, and I let him. The situation with Marietta escalated 3 days after I gave Lyla the collar. Rona brought the report at dawn, his face set in the flat, controlled expression he wore when delivering information he knew would provoke me. Marietta had spoken to the Titan elders, 6 of them, the oldest and most influential wolves from the former Pax Council. She had presented a formal case for a political mating between herself and the new Alpha, citing precedent, pack stability, and the traditional obligation of a conquering Alpha to take a mate from the conquered Pack's leadership. It was well constructed. Marietta was her mother's daughter, cunning, patient, fluent in the language of Pack politics. The elders had listened, and while they had not formally endorsed her proposal, they had not rejected it either. In Pack dynamics, silence was Ascent's quieter sister. "There is more," Rona said. "Of course there was. She has been spreading a rumor. That the Omega bewitched you. That she used dark magic, old Omega witchcraft, to cloud your judgment and turn you against the Pack's interests. The rumor is gaining traction among the Titan wolves who resent the restructuring." I stood at my tent's entrance and watched the camp come alive in the morning light. Warriors filed toward the training grounds. Kitchen smoke rose in gray columns. Somewhere near the medical tent, a dog with a splinted leg was probably ignoring healer Zara's instructions. "How many believe it?" I asked. "Enough to matter, not enough to act." Yet, timeline? Marietta is building toward the next moon gathering. 4 days. She will likely present her case publicly and force a response. If you reject her, she will use the witchcraft narrative to frame your rejection as evidence of enchantment. If you accept— "I will not accept," Rona nodded. He had expected that. Then you need to control the narrative before she presents it. Acknowledge the Omega publicly as— He paused, choosing his next word carefully. "Something. Give her a title, a role, something that legitimizes your protection without revealing the bond." He was right. In Pack politics, unnamed things were vulnerable things. Lyla existed in a gray space, protected by my word but undefined by rank, and undefined things attracted suspicion the way open wounds attracted flies. Marietta was exploiting that ambiguity, and she would continue to exploit it until I closed it. "There is a position," I said slowly. The idea had been forming for days, circling the edges of my awareness the way strategies do when they are not yet ready to be spoken. In the old Spartan tradition, before the training reforms, Rona's eyebrows rose a fraction. The keeper. The keeper of the den was an ancient lichen role, abolished generations ago when the Spartan order shifted entirely to a military structure. The keeper was neither warrior nor servant. She was the guardian of the Alpha's household, responsible for the physical and spiritual maintenance of the Alpha's space. She answered only to the Alpha. She could not be commanded, punished, or claimed by any other wolf. She was, in the old language, the hand that tends the fire, essential, untouchable, and bound to the Alpha's hearth by tradition rather than rank. It was not a mate's position, but it was a position of proximity and protection that could not be challenged without challenging the Alpha's authority over his own household. It would neutralize Marietta's political maneuvering by placing Lyla in a role that existed outside the mating hierarchy entirely. "The elders will resist," Rona said. "The position has not been used in 200 years. The elders serve at my discretion. If they resist, I will remind them of that. And Lyla? Does she agree to this?" I paused. I had not asked her. I'd been making decisions about her life without her input, the way every Alpha before me had made decisions about her life, and the realization sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. "I will ask her," I said. Rona's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. It might have been surprise, or it might have been the closest thing to approval that a man who had spent 12 years having his emotions beaten out of him could produce. That, he said, would be a first. "I found her in the herb garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, her hands buried in the soil, her hair, recently combed, I noted, with the 3-toothed comb I had left on her blanket, tied back with a strip of cloth. Bones lay beside her with his splinted leg extended, gnawing on a stick with his crooked jaw. The leather collar I had braided circled his neck, and something inside me tightened at the sight of it. She looked up when she heard me. Her hands went still. The color rose in her cheeks. Subtle, but I caught it the way I caught everything about her now, with an awareness that bordered on obsession and probably crossed it. "Hector!" She used my name, not my title. The sound of it in her voice did things to my chest that I was not equipped to process. "Walk with me," I said. She stood. Bones stood. We both looked at the dog. "He comes," I said, because the dog was going to come whether I said so or not, and I had learned that some battles were not worth fighting. We walked. Not toward the camp's center, where eyes would find us, but toward the perimeter. The tree line where the forest began and the camp's noise dimmed to a murmur. Bones limped between us, his tail swaying, periodically stopping to sniff at things that only dogs found interesting. The silence was comfortable in a way I had not expected. I was not a man who did comfortable silences. I was a man who did purposeful silences, the kind that pressured confessions or preceded orders. But walking beside Lyla, in the dappled light of the tree line, with her dog hobbling between us and the wind carrying the scent of pine and turned earth, I found that silence could be a space rather than a weapon. "I need to ask you something," I said. She tensed. "I felt it the way you feel a change in weather, not in any specific sense, but in the atmosphere between us." Her shoulders drew inward. Her steps shortened. The old reflex, the flinch that lived in her body like a second skeleton, always ready, always expecting the blow. I hated that reflex. I hated every person who had built it. "It is not a command," I said. "It is a question. You can say no." She looked at me. Her brown eyes were wide, cautious, searching for the trap. "Alphas don't ask questions. This one does." I told her about the keeper. I told her about the tradition, the role, the protections it carried. I told her about Marietta's campaign and the witchcraft rumor and the political mating proposal, because she deserved to know the full picture, not the edited version I would have given any other subordinate. I told her that the position would place her in my household, my tent, my hearth, my space, and that it would bind her to me in a way that was formal and public and could not be undone without ceremony. I told her all of it, and then I waited. She was quiet for a long time. We had stopped walking. Bones sat between us and looked from her face to mine with the patient attentiveness of a creature who understood that important things were happening. "Why me?" she asked. The same question again. The question she kept asking because my answers kept failing to reach the depth of what she actually wanted to know. I could have given her the strategic answer. The position requires someone without political ties. You are the only candidate who cannot be accused of ambition. It protects us both. All true. All insufficient. Instead, I said, because you combed your hair. She stared at me. What? The comb I left. You used it. You spent time. Time you did not have. Time you could have spent sleeping or resting your ribs. Combed your hair. Not for anyone else. Not because someone told you to. Because something inside you decided that you were worth the effort. I held her gaze. That is why. Because you are starting to believe what I already know, and I want to give you the space to finish. Her eyes filled. She blinked, and 2 tears slid down her cheeks, cutting lines through the faint dust on her skin. She did not wipe them away. She stood there in the dappled light with her dirty hands and her combed hair and her tears and her dog, and she looked at me the way no one had ever looked at me. Not with fear, not with awe, not with the calculated deference I had spent my life commanding. She looked at me like I was safe. Yes, she said, I'll be your keeper. Bones thumped his tail. The trees rustled. Somewhere in the camp, a warrior shouted orders, and the world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that something enormous had just happened in the space between 2 people and a dog at the edge of a forest. I nodded. I did not trust myself to speak, because my wolf was slamming against my ribs with a force that threatened to shatter them, and if I opened my mouth, I was not sure what would come out. We walked back to the camp in silence. Bones limped between us, and at one point, his hobbling gait brought him against my leg instead of hers, and he leaned into me for 2 steps before correcting course. I let him. I did not know how to let people in, but I was learning to let in a dog, and the dog was teaching me, 1 crooked step at a time.
I moved into the Alpha's tent on a Wednesday, and the pack lost its collective mind. Not loudly. Wolves in a military camp did not riot. But the whispers became a roar. I could feel them as I crossed the camp with my blanket under one arm and Bones hobbling beside me, the weight of 100 stares pressing against my skin like hands. Some were curious. Some were hostile. Some were the bewildered looks of wolves who had watched me scrub floors for 5 years and could not reconcile that person with the one walking into the Alpha's tent carrying a ratty blanket and a 3-legged dog. The tent had been modified. A partition of heavy canvas divided the sleeping area. Hector's fur on one side, a smaller sleeping platform with fresh linens on the other. A workbench had been added near the entrance, stocked with herbs and bandages and the tools of a keeper's trade. A water basin. A fire pit with a cooking frame. Everything I needed to maintain the space, arranged with the meticulous precision of a man who had planned every detail and then pretended it had always been that way. He was not in the tent when I arrived. I set my blanket on the platform, then picked it up and held it against my chest, unsure if I was allowed to use the linens or if they were decorative, a display of status for visitors. I stood there clutching my ratty blanket, paralyzed by the gap between what I was being given and what I believed I deserved. Bones had no such crisis. He inspected the tent with his nose, circled Hector's fur 3 times, and flopped onto it with a groan of satisfaction. His splinted legs stuck out sideways. His tail wagged. "Bones, no," I hissed. "That's the Alpha's." But the dog was already asleep, his crooked jaw resting on the edge of the fur, drool forming a small puddle on what was probably the most expensive piece of bedding in the entire camp. I gave up. I set my blanket aside, sat on the sleeping platform, and pressed my palms against the fresh linens. They were cool and smooth and smelled faintly of lavender. Zara's doing, probably. I had not slept on anything smooth since before my parents died. "You deserve this," Joy said quietly. "You are allowed to have things, Lyla." I lay down. The platform was firm but not hard. The linens were clean, and the tent was warm from the afternoon sun soaking through the canvas. I closed my eyes and listened to Bones' snore on the alpha's fur and the distant sounds of the camp going about its business, and I tried to make myself believe that this was real, that I was here, that the cursed Omega who ate leftovers and slept on cold floors was lying on clean linens in the alpha's tent with a title that no one could take from her. I fell asleep. I did not mean to, but the warmth and the quiet and the unimaginable luxury of safety pulled me under, and I slept harder and deeper than I had in years. I woke to voices. The tent flap was closed, but I could hear them outside. Hector's baritone and another voice, female, sharp with controlled fury. I sat up quietly and listened. An insult to the elders, to the traditions, and to every she-wolf in this pack who has waited for the honor of standing beside you. Madame Teresa. I would know that voice in the dark, in a storm, from the bottom of a grave. It was the voice that had narrated my worst years, the soundtrack of the whip and the burn and the moonbound needle. The keeper is a legitimate tradition, Hector replied. His voice was level, almost bored. The way a cliff is level, flat, immovable, concealing an enormous drop. A tradition no one has used in 200 years. You resurrected a dead custom to protect a cursed Omega, and you expect us to believe there is nothing more to it? I expect you to obey it. What you believe is your concern. My daughter. Your daughter sent 2 she-wolves to break a dog's leg. Your daughter has been lobbying the elders for a political mating behind my back. Your daughter. Hector's voice dropped to a register I had not heard before, a frequency that vibrated in my bones, has been spreading a rumor that the Omega used witchcraft to control me, which is not only a lie but an accusation of weakness against the alpha of this pack. Against me. Silence, the kind that follows the unsheathing of a blade. If your daughter approaches the Omega again, directly or through proxies, I will consider it a challenge to my authority, and I will respond accordingly. Do you understand what I mean by accordingly, Madame Teresa? More silence. Then footsteps, rapid and retreating. Madame Teresa leaving, not with the composed dignity of a woman who had made her point, but with the hurried gait of a woman who had just realized she was standing on the edge of the cliff. I heard Hector exhale, a single long breath, the sound of a man releasing tension he had held so tightly that the release itself was an act of effort. The tent flap opened, and he ducked inside, and his eyes found me immediately. You heard, he said. Not a question. Yes. He looked at his fur. Bones was still on it, sprawled across the center with the boneless abandon of a dog who had claimed territory and intended to defend it with sleep. A small smile, the first I had ever seen on Hector's face, twitched at the corner of his mouth and disappeared. Your dog is on my bed. I tried to stop him. I doubt that. He moved to his side of the partition and began removing his weapons. Belt first, then the blade at his hip, then the smaller knives strapped to his forearms. Each one he placed on the rack with practiced precision, and I watched the ritual with the same focus I gave to everything about him now, hungrily, carefully, storing details the way a person stores food when they have known starvation. The tattoo on his right chest, the scar below his left shoulder blade that was wider than the others, older, more ragged, the way his muscles moved under his skin when he reached for the top rack, not showing off, not posturing, just the mechanical function of a body that had been shaped by 12 years of combat and did not know how to be anything other than a weapon. He caught me looking, our eyes locked, and the air in the tent changed, thickened, warmed, became something with weight and texture that pressed against my skin. Joy surged inside me, and for once I did not push her down. I let her rise, let her feel what I was feeling, let her press against my ribs and fill the space behind my eyes, until the tent blurred and refocused, and the only clear thing in the room was him. He felt it too. I could see it, the way his hands stilled on the weapon rack, the way his jaw tightened, the way his nostrils flared as if catching a scent he could not resist. His wolf was close to the surface. I could see it in his eyes, the green darkening, the pupils expanding, the predator in him pressing against his control the way joy pressed against mine. The moment stretched, the canvas walls breathed with the wind. Bones snored. Lyla. His voice was rough, not commanding, almost asking, "Yes?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The most powerful alpha in the Wolf Kingdom, the man who commanded armies with a word, could not finish a sentence. Then Bones farted in his sleep, a long, rumbling, audible event that broke the silence like a stone through glass. And the moment shattered. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Hector stared at the dog. Bones, oblivious, shifted on the fur and sighed contentedly. A sound came from Hector, small, strangled, involuntary. It took me a moment to identify it because I had never heard it from him before. He was laughing. Not a full laugh, not even close. A huff of air through his nose, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a shake of his head so slight that anyone else would have missed it. But I did not miss it. I caught it the way I caught everything about him, with the desperate attention of a woman who had discovered that the terrifying, scarred, emotionally fortified alpha of all alphas could be undone by a dog's flatulence. I laughed. I could not help it. The sound escaped me before I could trap it, bright and startled and real. The kind of laugh that comes from a place you forgot existed. It echoed off the tent walls, and Hector's almost smile widened by a millimeter. And for 3 seconds, 4, 5, we were not an alpha and an omega, or a weapon and a wound, or any of the things the world had made us. We were 2 people laughing at a farting dog, and it was the most human I had felt in years. The laughter faded, the warmth stayed. "Good night, Lyla," Hector said. His voice was quiet, and there was something in it that had not been there before, a softness, raw and new, like skin under a shed scab. "Good night, Hector." He lay on the far edge of his fur, the edge Bones had not colonized, and I lay on my platform with the clean linens and the lavender scent, and between us, a stray dog with a broken leg snored and drooled and took up more space than any 30-pound animal had a right to. I stared at the tent roof in the dark and listened to 3 heartbeats, mine quick and unsteady, Bones slow and deep, and Hector's steady as a drum, the heartbeat of a man who was awake and did not want me to know it. I knew it anyway. I knew it the way I knew his scent and his step and the exact shade of green his eyes turned when his wolf was close. I knew it because the bond was there, singing between us like a wire pulled taut, and I was tired, so tired, of pretending I could not hear it. "Tell him," Joy whispered. "Let him hear you, not yet, but soon." Because the woman who combed her hair with a broken comb and faced Marietta alone in her tent and ripped a staff from a she-wolf's hands was not the same woman who had been tied to a tree. She was becoming something else, something with teeth and a voice and the terrifying, fragile, bone-deep understanding that she might be worthy of being loved. Not yet, but soon. Bones farted again. Hector made the sound. I pressed my face into the linens and shook with silent laughter, and joy hummed inside me, and the night wrapped around the 3 of us like a hand. I had been Hector's keeper for 9 days when I stopped lying to myself. It happened on a nothing morning, no crisis, no confrontation, no moment designed by fate to crack me open. I was kneeling by the fire pit in his tent, building the first flame of the day, and Hector was awake on his fur, sitting upright with his forearms resting on his knees and his eyes half closed in the gray light before dawn. Bones was between us, lying on his back with his splinted leg in the air and his tongue hanging sideways out of his crooked jaw, the picture of absolute, shameless comfort. Hector was watching the dog, not me. He did not know I was looking at him. His guard was down, not entirely, because I suspected that Hector's guard was never entirely down, that even in sleep some part of him stood watch, but lower than I had ever seen it. His face in the pre-dawn gray was almost soft. The hard line of his jaw relaxed. His eyes, unguarded, carried a warmth that he would have denied if anyone described it to him. He reached out and scratched Bones behind the ear, gently, absently, the way a man touches something he has grown accustomed to loving without deciding to. Bones's tail thumped. Hector's fingers found the spot beneath the torn ear where the fur was thinnest, and the dog groaned with pleasure and leaned into the touch, and the alpha of all alphas let him. That was the moment. Not a kiss, not a dramatic revelation beneath a full moon. A man scratching a dog's ear at dawn, not knowing he was being watched, not performing for anyone, just existing in a quiet space with a creature he had let past his walls without meaning to. Joy did not whisper this time. She spoke clearly, firmly, the way she had spoken years ago before the moonbound silenced her. He is ours, Lyla, and we are his. Stop running from it. I was not running. I was not even walking. I was kneeling by a fire pit with kindling in my hands and tears on my face, watching a man be gentle, and the last wall inside me, the one I had built from Carl's rejection and 5 years of whips and the bone-deep belief that I was too broken to be wanted, came down. Not in a crash, in a dissolve, like salt in water. Hector turned and saw me crying, his hand stilled on Bones's ear, his eyes sharpened, sweeping me for injury, for threat, for the cause of pain. That was his instinct, to search for something to fight. Lyla, what is wrong? I set down the kindling. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I stood up on legs that wanted to buckle and crossed the 4 feet of space between the fire pit and his fur, and I stood in front of him while he sat and looked up at me with those green eyes. And I said the thing I had been hiding since the clearing. You are my mate. The tent went silent. Even Bones stopped breathing. Hector did not move. His face did not change. But something behind his eyes detonated. I saw it. The way you see lightning before the thunder, a white flash in the green that traveled through his entire body in a single visible wave. His hands resting on his knees clenched, his jaw locked. His chest expanded with a breath he held for 3 seconds, 4 or 5, before releasing it in a controlled exhale that shook at the edges. Say it again, he said. His voice was barely a sound, a vibration in the air between us. You are my mate. I have known since you crouched over my broken body at the border, and your scent cut through the blood and the moonbound and found me underneath. I have been hiding it because I was afraid. My voice cracked. I pushed through it, afraid that if I said it, you would reject me the way Carl did, and I would not survive it a second time. Hector stood. The motion was slow, controlled, the deliberate rise of a man containing something enormous. He towered over me. He always towered over me, but this close, in the gray dawn light, the size of him was not intimidating. It was encompassing. The wall of his chest, the breadth of his shoulders, the heat radiating from his skin. It was not a cage. It was a shelter. He raised his hand, slowly, so slowly that I could have stepped away at any point, could have flinched, could have retreated into the safe, small space where I had lived for so long. His fingers touched my jaw, just his fingertips, barely there, the lightest contact I had ever felt from another person. My skin erupted. The tingles, the bond's signature, the thing I had been suppressing for weeks, raced from the point of contact through my jaw, down my neck, across my chest, into the place where Joy lived. She surged. She surged so hard that I gasped, and the gasp was not pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was the sensation of a door opening after years of dark. I have known since the clearing, Hector said. His voice was rough, stripped of command, raw in a way I had never heard from him. My wolf recognized you before I saw your face. He screamed your name against my ribs, and I silenced him because I was afraid too. I stared at him. You were afraid? Of becoming what he was to you, of being another alpha who took a mate and destroyed her. I have been built to break things, Lyla. Every instinct I have is a weapon. I did not know how to stand beside you without the risk of standing on you. His thumb traced my jawline. The tingles followed his touch like fire follows a fuse, so I stayed in the shadows. I left things on your blanket instead of putting them in your hands. I braided a collar for your dog because I could not. He stopped. His throat worked. The alpha who commanded armies could not finish the sentence. Because you could not braid one for me, I finished. His eyes closed. When they opened, the green was darker, deeper, liquid with something I had never seen in another person's gaze directed at me. Not desire, though desire was there, unmistakable, pressing against his control like his wolf pressed against his ribs. It was the thing beyond desire, the thing that stays when desire leaves, the thing that makes a man scratch a dog's ear at dawn with the same hands that have ended 100 lives. I will never reject you, he said. Each word was a brick laid in mortar, permanent, structural. I will never raise a hand to you. I will never use this bond as a weapon. And if I fail, if I break what I have sworn to protect, your dog has my permission to bite me. A laugh bubbled out of me, wet, shaky, ridiculous, and Bones thumped his tail on the fur as if accepting the terms. Hector's hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, gentle, cradling, his fingers threading into my hair. He leaned down. His forehead touched mine. The contact was small and vast at the same time. 2 skulls touching, 2 brains separated by inches of bone. And between them, the mate bond singing like a plucked string, vibrating through both of us until I could not tell where I ended and he began. He did not kiss me, not yet. He held me there, forehead to forehead, and breathed with me. Slow, synchronized, his exhale becoming my inhale, my exhale becoming his, until our breathing was one rhythm and our heartbeats, though different in pace, found a pattern that contained them both. Lyla Archer, he said against my skin, keeper of my den. I accept you as my mate, whatever comes, war, politics, enemies, a dog that steals my bed and destroys the air quality in my tent. I choose you. I will always choose you. I closed my eyes. The tears came, and I let them. They were not the tears of the girl tied to the tree, or the girl on the cold floor, or the girl who accepted a rejection in a room full of captives. They were the tears of a woman who'd been told she was nothing for so long that being told she was something felt like being born. I choose you too, I whispered. I'm terrified, but I choose you, Bones. Apparently sensing that the emotional moment had reached its peak, chose this precise instant to stand up, shove his entire head between our legs, and sneeze violently on Hector's knee. Hector looked down at the dog. The dog looked up at Hector. A strand of mucus connected Bones's nose to the alpha's leg. I am going to regret giving you that collar, Hector said. I laughed until my ribs ached, the good ache, the ache of being alive and knowing it. And the morning light filled the tent, and the fire caught in the pit. And somewhere outside, the camp woke to a new day that did not know yet that its alpha had a mate. But it would, soon.
This chapter is told from Hector's perspective. The moon gathering was in 2 days, and Marietta was moving faster than I had anticipated. Rona's intelligence network, a web of loyal warriors, discreet informants, and one kitchen worker who owed Rona a blood debt, reported the following. Marietta had secured the formal endorsement of 4 of the 6 Titan elders. She had prepared a public declaration invoking the right of claim, an ancient tradition that allowed a she-wolf of noble birth to formally petition for a mating with an unclaimed alpha. If the petition was made before the full pack at a moon gathering and the alpha did not immediately refuse, it was considered accepted by silence. It was a trap built on protocol. If I refused publicly, Marietta would activate the witchcraft narrative. The cursed Omega had enchanted the Alpha, and his refusal was proof. If I hesitated, silence would be taken as consent. Either way, she would force me into a position where rejecting her appeared irrational, and the elders would have grounds to question my judgment. Clever. Dangerously clever. Marietta had inherited her mother's cunning, and refined it with a patience Madame Teresa had never possessed. But she had miscalculated. She was playing a political game, and political games operate on the assumption that all players are governed by the same rules. She did not know about the bond. She did not know that the man she was maneuvering toward was already claimed by the moon goddess herself, and that the cursed Omega she was trying to displace was not an obstacle to be removed, but a fact of nature to be reckoned with. She was playing chess. I was about to flip the board. We reveal the bond at the gathering, I told Rona. We were in my tent. It was evening, the day before the moon gathering. Lyla was in the herb garden with Bones, and I had summoned Rona and Darius for what was, in military terms, a final operational briefing. Rona did not react. Darius leaned forward. The mate bond, Darius said. Not a question, a confirmation. The beta was not surprised, which meant he had figured it out himself, and I made a mental note to evaluate how many others had done the same. The mate bond, I confirmed. Marietta will present her right of claim at the gathering. I will let her present it. I will let her make her case to the full pack, with the elders watching, with her supporters in the crowd. And when she is finished, when she has committed fully, publicly, irrevocably, I will reveal that the bond exists and has existed since the day I arrived. You want to let her dig her own grave, Rona said. I want to let her demonstrate, in front of every wolf in this pack, that she attempted to claim a mated alpha. Under Lycan law, that is not a political maneuver. It is a violation of the sacred bond. The elders who endorsed her will be implicated. Her coalition collapses. Her credibility is destroyed. And the witchcraft narrative dies because the bond is proof that the moon goddess chose Lyla. Not magic, not manipulation, but divine selection. Darius nodded slowly. It is sound, but there is a risk. The Omega, Rona said. Yes, the risk was Lyla. Revealing the bond publicly meant exposing her to the full weight of the pack's scrutiny. Every wolf would know. Every wolf would have an opinion. She would go from invisible to inescapable in the span of a single night, and I had seen what visibility did to her. The tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes dropped, the old reflexes that turned attention into threat. I was asking her to stand in the center of a crowd and let them see her, not the Omega, not the cursed girl, the Alpha's mate, the woman the moon goddess chose. It was the hardest thing I could ask of her, and I would not do it without her consent. I will speak to her tonight, I said. If she says no, we find another way. Darius and Rona exchanged a look. It was brief, a flicker of something that passed between two men who had known each other for 12 years and did not need words for most communications. If I had to name it, I would call it something uncomfortably close to respect, not for the strategy, for the fact that I was asking. They left. I sat in the tent and waited for Lyla to return from the garden, and my wolf paced inside my chest with the restless energy of an animal who knew that tomorrow, one way or another, the hiding would end. She came in with dirt on her knees and lavender in her hair and Bones limping at her side with a stick in his mouth that was twice his body length. She propped the stick against the tent wall. It was becoming a collection. The dog had opinions about interior decoration and knelt by the fire pit to build the evening flame. I watched her hands work, kindling first arranged in a precise lattice she had learned from healer Zara. Then the tinder, dried moss, shredded bark, tucked into the gaps. She struck the flint once, twice, and the spark caught, and the fire grew, and the tent warmed with a light that softened everything it touched. She looked up and saw my face. "What is it?" she asked. She could read me now. Not perfectly, not completely, but well enough to know when the weight behind my eyes was heavier than usual. I had not decided if this alarmed or comforted me. I told her everything, the right of claim, Marietta's strategy, the trap, the counter-strategy. I told her what I intended to do and what it would mean for her, for us, for the pack. I held nothing back because she had earned the full picture, and I would not make decisions about her life from behind a war table again. When I finished, the fire crackled between us, and Bones chewed his stick, and Lyla sat very still with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the flame. "You want me to stand in front of the whole pack," she said. "Yes. And let them see me?" "Yes." "As your mate?" "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Bones destroyed his stick methodically, reducing it to splinters that would take me 10 minutes to sweep. "Every she-wolf in that pack will hate me," she said. Not with self-pity, with the clinical accuracy of a woman who had spent her life being hated and understood its mechanics. "Some will. Marietta will try to destroy me. Marietta will have no ground to stand on. Her claim will be publicly invalidated. Her elders will distance themselves. Her power base will evaporate. And if it doesn't? If they don't believe the bond is real? If they think it's a trick or a lie or—" "Lyla." She stopped. Her eyes met mine across the fire. The bond is not something that needs to be believed. It exists. It is as real as gravity and as indifferent to opinion. When I stand beside you tomorrow and declare it, every wolf in that clearing will feel it. They will smell it in our scents, see it in our eyes, sense it in the space between us. The bond does not hide. We have been hiding it. When we stop, it will speak for itself. She looked at me with those brown eyes that had seen more cruelty than any person should survive, and I watched the calculation happen behind them. Not the cold calculation of strategy, but the deeper, harder calculation of a woman measuring the distance between who she was and who she would need to be. I stood in Marietta's tent with nothing but my voice. She said slowly. I stood over Bones with a staff in my hands. I accepted Carl's rejection in a room full of captives. She straightened. The motion was small but absolute, a realignment, a settling. Like a foundation finding its footing. I can stand beside you in front of the pack. My wolf surged with something that was not triumph, but recognition. The same recognition I had felt in the clearing watching a stray dog bare its teeth at an army. The recognition of a courage that does not announce itself because it is too busy surviving. "Are you sure?" I asked, because she deserved to be asked. Because asking was the thing that separated me from every alpha who had come before. She reached across the fire's warmth and took my hand. Her fingers were small in mine, dirt under the nails, calluses on the palms, the scar from Madame Teresa's iron on the inside of her wrist. My hand closed around hers, and the bond flared between us like a struck match, and Joy and my wolf pressed toward each other through our joined skin with a hunger that made the air vibrate. "I am sure," she said. "Just don't let go of my hand. Never." Bones, having destroyed his stick completely, trotted over and dropped a splinter on our joined hands, then sat back and wagged his tail expectantly. "He wants you to throw it," Lyla said. "It is a splinter. He doesn't know that." I picked up the splinter and tossed it across the tent. Bones launched after it on 3 legs, skidded on the packed earth, crashed into the weapons rack, and emerged with the splinter in his mouth and the satisfaction of a successful hunt on his crooked face. Tomorrow, I would stand before my pack and reveal that the moon goddess had paired me with a broken omega. Tomorrow, Marietta's scheme would unravel. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, I threw splinters for a dog and held my mate's hand by the fire, and it was enough.
This chapter is told from Lila's perspective. The moon was full and heavy and the color of bone. It hung over the gathering, clearing like a witness, flooding the space with silver light that turned the torches pale and cast every face in sharp relief. The entire pack was there. Spartans on the north side in rigid formation, Titan wolves on the south in loose clusters, the elders seated on carved wooden chairs at the western edge. Children sat cross-legged at the front. Warriors stood at the back. The clearing was full, and the air thrummed with the nervous electric energy of a pack that knew something was about to happen but did not know what. I stood behind Hector's tent, hidden from the crowd, with Bones at my feet and my heart trying to exit through my throat. I was wearing a new dress, the first new dress I had owned since before Carl. Healer Zara had produced it that afternoon without explanation. A simple thing in dark blue linen that fit my body rather than hanging from it. When I put it on, I stared at my reflection in the water basin for a full minute, trying to reconcile the woman in the blue dress with the girl in the shapeless rags. They did not look like the same person. I was not sure they were. "You are beautiful," Joy said, and for the first time, she did not sound like she was trying to convince me. She sounded like she was stating a fact she was tired of me ignoring. Hector appeared at the tent's entrance. He was in full regalia, the black hide armor, the weapons belt, the dark authority that clung to him like a second skin. His eyes swept over me, and something moved behind them, something warm and fierce that he contained with the discipline of a man accustomed to containing things. "You are ready," he said, Not a question, but not quite a statement either. An offering. A chance to change my mind. I looked at Bones. He sat with his splinted leg extended and his one good eye on my face and his tail perfectly still. Waiting. The way he had waited at the tree, at the clearing, at every turning point of this impossible story, with a patience that was not passive but loaded, a coiled readiness to act the moment I gave the signal. "Ready," I said. Hector extended his hand. I took it. The bond flared, warm and electric, and joy pressed against my ribs, and we walked toward the clearing. Marietta was already there. She stood at the center of the clearing in a white dress that caught the moonlight and turned her into a beacon. Her hair was elaborately braided, threaded with silver beads that clicked softly when she moved. She was stunning, objectively, undeniably stunning, and she knew it, and she had positioned herself with the moon behind her so that its light framed her silhouette like a halo. Madame Teresa stood behind her, arms folded, chin raised. The 4 allied elders sat in their chairs with the composed expectation of men who had been promised a show. The crowd murmured and shifted, and every pair of eyes moved between Marietta at the center and the gap in the northern formation where the Alpha would enter. We entered from the east, not through the formation, around it, from the side, so that the crowd did not see us until we were already in the clearing. Hector walked with the measured stride of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet, and I walked beside him, my hand in his, and Bones limped at my other side with his collar gleaming and his crooked jaw set in the expression of a dog who had opinions about large social gatherings and intended to make them known if provoked. The murmur became a roar. Then it became silence. Every eye in the clearing found our joined hands. Every nose caught what our hands were broadcasting, the bond's scent, amplified by contact, pouring off us like heat from a forge. It was unmistakable, even across the clearing, even in the open air. The scent of a true mate bond was as distinct as blood. You could not fake it. You could not manufacture it. You could only stand in it and let it speak. Marietta's face. I will remember Marietta's face for the rest of my life. The confidence drained out of her like water from a cracked vessel. Her eyes locked on our joined hands, then rose to Hector's face, then dropped to mine, and in the span of 3 seconds, I watched her understand everything. The protection, the keeper title, the collar, the gifts on the blanket, the shadows he watched from, all of it, every piece of the puzzle she had been trying to solve for weeks, clicked into place, and the picture it formed was the one thing she had never considered. The Alpha was already taken. He'd been taken since the first day, and the thing that had taken him was not magic, not manipulation, not political strategy. It was a bond, the oldest, most sacred, most unbreakable force in the Wolf Kingdom, the one thing that even Marietta, with all her cunning, could not scheme her way around. Hector stopped in the center of the clearing, beside Marietta but not facing her. He faced the pack. His warriors closed formation behind us, Rona on the left, Darius on the right, Sable at the rear, and the Spartan line became a wall of muscle and authority that framed the announcement like a border frames a map. Marietta, daughter of Teresa, former beta line of the Titan pack. Hector's voice filled the clearing with the effortless authority of a man who had spent his life commanding. You have requested the right of claim. Speak. Every eye turned to Marietta. She stood in her white dress with the silver beads in her hair and the moonlight framing her silhouette, and for a moment, a long, terrible, suspended moment, she considered her options. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the rapid assessment of a woman who had just been outmaneuvered and was deciding whether to retreat or commit. She committed. Of course she did. Marietta was her mother's daughter, and Madame Teresa had never retreated from anything in her life. Alpha Hector of the Spartan Lycan order. Her voice was clear, carrying across the clearing with a strength that was almost admirable. I, Marietta Vasquez, daughter of Beta Teresa of the Titan pack, invoked the right of claim. By tradition and by law, I petition for the position of your mate. I am of noble blood. I am unmated and of age. I offer myself to strengthen the bond between our packs and to stand beside you as your equal. She paused. The clearing held its breath. I further submit to the elder's endorsement. She turned to the 4 allied elders, Elder Tomas, Elder Kiran, Elder Marcus, Elder Dia. You have heard my case and found it worthy. Will you confirm your endorsement before the full pack? The elders shifted. Elder Tomas, the oldest, opened his mouth, then stopped. His nostrils flared. His eyes moved from Marietta to me, to our joined hands, and his face changed the way faces change when the ground shifts beneath your feet. He smelled it. They all smelled it. Elder Tomas? Marietta's voice carried an edge. The plan required their confirmation. Without it, the claim had no weight. Tomas looked at Marietta, then at me, then at Hector, and he sat back in his chair and said nothing. The silence spread. Elder Kiran looked at his hands. Marcus studied the tree line. Dia closed her eyes. One by one, the endorsements Marietta had spent weeks cultivating evaporated like dew in sunlight, and she stood in the center of the clearing with her white dress, and her silver beads, and her carefully constructed power play, and she watched it disintegrate. Hector waited. He let the silence do its work, let the pack see the elders retreat, let them smell what the elders smelled, let the truth fill the space like water filling a basin. Only when the silence had become unbearable, only when every wolf in the clearing was leaning forward, desperate for explanation, did he speak. The right of claim is denied. His voice was not loud, but it reached every ear. Not by my decision, but by the moon goddess herself. He raised our joined hands. The bond's scent intensified. I felt it pulse through our contact, a wave of warmth and light that was not visible, but was felt by every wolf in the clearing as clearly as the moonlight on their skin. Lyla Archer is my true mate, bonded by the moon goddess, confirmed by the sacred scent. This bond has existed since my return to this pack, and it supersedes any claim of tradition, politics, or petition. The clearing erupted, not in chaos, in sound. Gasps, whispers, the sharp intake of 100 breaths, the rustle of bodies shifting and turning. Warriors looked at each other. She-wolves stared. Children tugged at their parents' arms. The elders who had retreated from Marietta's endorsement now sat forward, their faces a mixture of awe and the scrambling recalculation of men who had just bet on the wrong horse. Marietta stood in the center of it all, and the white dress that had been a beacon was now a spotlight on her devastation. Her face was blank, not the composed blankness of control, but the empty blankness of a woman whose entire world had just been rewritten without her consent. Behind her, Madame Teresa's face was a mask of fury so complete that it vibrated. I expected to feel triumph. I expected the moment to taste like victory, the sweet, vindicating flavor of a cursed Omega standing in the moonlight while her tormentor's schemes collapsed. I had imagined this moment, in the dark of Madame Teresa's tent, on the floor where I slept, in the spaces between lashes and burns, and the endless repetition of "you are nothing." But standing there, with Hector's hand around mine, and the pack's eyes on my face, and joy singing in my chest like a freed bird, I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter and more terrifying. I felt compassion. Marietta had done terrible things to me. She had whipped me, burned me, poisoned me, broken my dog's leg, tried to destroy the only protection I had ever known. She had done all of it because she was afraid of being powerless in a world that valued nothing else, afraid that without a mate of status, she would be as invisible as I had been. Her fear did not excuse her cruelty. But standing in the moonlight, watching her world end, I understood it. I understood it because I had lived in it. Hector was still speaking. He was addressing the elders, laying out the formal confirmation of the bond, citing traditions and laws, and the sacred protocols that govern mate claims. His voice was steady and commanding, and everything a pack needed to hear from its alpha. But his thumb was tracing slow circles on the back of my hand, and I knew that his steadiness was not the absence of feeling but the careful containment of it. I stood beside him and let the moonlight see me. Not the Omega, not the cursed girl, not the sacrifice at the tree or the slave at the sink or the invisible thing that scrubbed floors and ate leftovers and believed she deserved nothing beautiful or happy. Just Lyla, a woman with a name and a bond and a 3-legged dog who had once stood between her and the world and dared it to come closer. Bones sat at my feet, his collar gleaming in the moonlight, his crooked jaw resting on his paw, perfectly calm. He did not care about the crowd or the politics or the sacred protocols. He had known from the beginning what the rest of the world was just now learning, that I was worth standing for. The gathering ended. The pack dispersed in small buzzing groups, processing what they had witnessed. Marietta left the clearing without a word, her mother's hand on her elbow, and the white dress disappeared into the dark. The elders bowed to Hector, deep, formal bows of recognition, and filed out. The warriors broke formation and returned to their posts. Hector and I stood in the emptying clearing with Bones between us and the full moon overhead, and neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The bond said it, humming between our joined hands like a current, filling the silver-washed air with the unmistakable scent of two wolves who belonged to each other. He looked at me. I looked at him. And then he kissed me. Not the way I had imagined an alpha would kiss. Not with force, not with possession, not with the consuming dominance that every story I had ever heard attributed to men like him. He kissed me the way he had touched my jaw that morning, slowly, deliberately, with a gentleness so precise it could only come from a man who had spent his life perfecting the control of his own strength. His lips were warm. His hand at the back of my neck was steady, and the bond between us ignited, not in a blaze but in a glow, a deep, sustained, permanent warmth that settled into my bones and said, very clearly, home. When we separated, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his heartbeat through the air between our chests, and Joy was not singing anymore. She was still, peacefully, completely, utterly still, the stillness of a wolf who has found her place and no longer needs to run. "Let's go home," Hector said. Home, a word I had never associated with a place, a word that had always meant absence, the home I lost, the home I was denied, the home that existed only in the imagination of a girl who had been told she did not deserve one. Now it meant a tent with a fire pit and a partition, and a weapons rack and a stray dog on the alpha's fur. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." Bones stood, shook himself, and limped ahead of us into the dark, leading the way with the confidence of a creature who had always known where home was. It was wherever we were. It had always been wherever we were. We followed him, together. 1 year later. The collar hangs on a hook by the door. Not because Bones does not wear it anymore. He does when he remembers that he is a dog with responsibilities, and not a small, crooked emperor who rules the alpha's tent by divine right. But most days the collar comes off when he crashes through the tent flap at dusk, and I hang it on the hook Hector carved into the center post, and it stays there until morning, a small circle of braided leather that means more than any crown in the wolf kingdom. It is the first thing I see when I wake, the last thing I see before sleep, a reminder of where this started, not with the bond, not with the gathering, not with the kiss under a bone-white moon. It started with a man who did not know how to say what he felt, so he braided something for a dog instead. The tent is different now, larger. Hector had it expanded after the mating ceremony, not for luxury but for practicality, because 2 people and a dog, and the frankly alarming collection of sticks that Bones has accumulated require more space than a single warrior's quarters. The partition is gone. We sleep on the same fur now, and Bones sleeps between us with the entitlement of a creature who established territorial precedent early and has no intention of renegotiating. Hector pretends to mind. He does not mind. I have watched him, in the mornings when he thinks I am still asleep, reach across the dog and rest his hand on my hip, his fingers gentle on the curve of my waist, his breathing slow and steady. Sometimes he stays like that for minutes, not moving, just touching, as if confirming I am real, as if confirming that the thing he built did not collapse in the night. I am always awake when he does this. I keep my eyes closed and my breathing even, and I let him have the moment. Because I understand the need. I have it too. Some mornings I wake before dawn and press my hand against his chest just to feel his heartbeat, that steady drum that anchored me through every terrifying, impossible night since the clearing. I press my palm flat against his sternum and count the beats and think, this is real. This man is real. This life is real. I am allowed to have this. I am still learning that. I may always be learning it. The pack has settled, not easily. A conquered territory does not become a home overnight, and the first months after the gathering were a landscape of adjustment and friction, and the slow, grinding work of building trust where none existed. But Hector led the way he always led, with strategy and strength, and the ruthless clarity of a man who saw the world as a series of problems to be solved and solved them, one by one, without flinching. The Titan wolves integrated, some with grace, some with resentment, most with the pragmatic acceptance of wolves who understood that the alternative was worse. Hector gave them roles. He gave them purpose. He stripped the old hierarchies and built new ones based on merit rather than blood, and the pack that emerged was neither Spartan nor Titan but something new, harder, leaner, more functional than either had been alone. Marietta left. 3 weeks after the gathering, she and Madame Teresa packed their belongings and departed for a southern pack that had offered them refuge. I did not watch them go. I did not need to. The weight of their absence was enough, a lightness in the air, a space where the constant hum of threat had been, now filled with quiet. I heard later that Marietta found her true mate in the southern pack, a warrior of modest rank with a kind face and no ambition. I hope it is true. I hope she is happy. I hope the fear that drove her to cruelty has found a softer place to land. I mean that. It took me months to mean it, but I do. Healer Zara became my closest friend, though she would deny the word friend and call it a professional association, with an Omega who keeps showing up in her garden. She taught me herbs. She taught me healing. She taught me that the hands that had scrubbed floors and washed linens and taken whips could also mend wounds and ease fevers and coax life from soil. My hands had always been useful. She taught me they could also be good. Rona still terrifies me slightly. He would be pleased to know this. He remains Hector's shadow, his counsel, his conscience, the one man in the pack who can hold the alpha's gaze without flinching and tell him when he is wrong. He has never spoken more than 12 words to me in a single conversation. But last month he left a deer bone on the tent's doorstep for Bones, and when I thanked him, he grunted and walked away, and I understood that this was the Rona equivalent of a declaration of deep personal affection. Darius laughs more than any warrior should. He found his mate 4 months after the gathering, a Titan she-wolf named Asha, who is half his size and twice his volume, and who argues with him about everything from training schedules to the proper way to gut a fish. Their tent is the loudest in the camp. Hector says it is a tactical liability. I have seen him smile when he says it. Warrior Sable still patrols past the herb garden twice a day. I leave a cup of tea on the garden wall for him each morning. He has never acknowledged it. The cup is always empty when I collect it. Joy came back, not all at once, not in a dramatic surge of power or a sudden miraculous shift. She came back the way dawn comes, gradually, persistently, in increments so small that I did not notice until the light was everywhere. It started with her voice. For years, she had been a whisper, a faint presence buried under moonbound and trauma, speaking only in crisis, retreating the moment the crisis passed. But after the gathering, after the bond was acknowledged, after I stopped running from what I was, she began to stay. She commented on things. She had opinions about the herbs in my garden. She hummed when Hector was near. She growled, softly, playfully, when Bones stole food from my plate, and I am home. Offered to the beast. If this story caught your attention, thank you for staying with me. Stories like this take heart to write. And knowing someone is truly listening makes all the difference. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from, so it don't get lost in a sea of voices, and I can keep writing them for you.